Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Reborn as the Vigilante Rabbit? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku was having the worst day of his life. Yude had informed him he couldn't apply simply due to his quirklessness. His best friend burned his hero analysis notebook. His best friend then told him to kill himself. Izuku's #1 idol, All Might, said he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. His best friend got attacked by a villain, which was Izuku's fault, then yelled at him when he saved him. The heroes at the scene all yelled at him too, saying he was reckless because what could a quirkless kid do to help? On his walk home, Kaken just yelled at him more, saying that Izuku didn't save him, then he didn't help at all. So here he was, walking home drenched in weird sludge after everything that happened. He might just be delusional, but Izuku felt like something good should have happened. Like someone would just appear out of nowhere, telling him he could be a hero and Izuku getting a quirk somehow. Nothing like that happened though. He got to his house feeling emptier than usual. His mom was still at work. She always worked longer hours to keep them afloat. When his mom wasn't around, the house always felt cold and lifeless. Izuku hated the silence of it. His mom was the only reason he kept on living, even though he knew he disappointed her. She tried her best, but with a useless, quirkless kid like him, he was just holding her back. She wouldn't have to worry about money so much if he was gone. He hated burdening her more than anything. He cleared his thoughts and trudged to his room like a zombie, closing the door silently. He felt worse than usual, he knew why, but every day before this he could pick himself back up. No matter what up shit happened to him, he was able to be happy and hopeful the next day, same as always. Izuku didn't think he could do it this time, it was just too much. He looked at all the All Might and hero merch around his room, it made him sick just looking at it. Could they really call themselves heroes? When Kaken was suffocating, they all just waited around for the right quirk, or right time. How long would they have waited? What if Kaken died before the right quirk or right time came around? Izuku felt disgusted. He left his room to get a trash bag. He wasn't going to idolize false idols. He dumped every figurine, poster, comic book, and whatever other merch he had laying around into the trash bag. He didn't want it anymore. Posters were torn off walls, figurines tossed to the side, pristine collector's items now ruined. The only things spared were his clothes, if only because he didn't have much else besides hero merch. He tossed the trash bag of hero merch outside his door and faced his room again. Now, without it all, it was painfully empty. Izuku liked it though, it fit how he was currently feeling. Izuku realized he didn't have many interests besides heroes. It was a little pathetic now that he thought about it. Did he even know what he liked? He idolized All Might so much, wanted to be his exact copy. Now he was lost as to who Izuku even was in the first place. He laid on his now sheetless bed, staring at the ceiling above. Izuku expected himself to be sad, he usually was. Being a crybaby was a Midoriya family staple. He didn't though, he just felt empty. Izuku didn't know how he was going to make it through tomorrow. He'd just have to push through like he always did, he supposed. He closed his eyes, he tried to keep his thoughts from spiraling, but it never worked. What was the point of it all? Why should he continue to live when nothing would come of it? Izuku knew he likely wouldn't see his 18th birthday. Quirkless people had the highest current suicide rates. Izuku turned to lay on his side, he was just so excruciatingly tired. He curled up in a ball and focused every thought on just going to sleep. It didn't work, of course. Izuku still spent another 3 hours stuck in his own head before he actually fell asleep, still in his Gakuren. Izuku woke up to a knock at his door. Izuku, time to get ready for school. Guess dread was the first emotion Izuku was feeling today. He didn't want to make his mom's life difficult, though, so he pulled himself out of bed to brush his teeth and get ready. Technically, he was already dressed. He brushed his teeth and tried to tame his hair down, but with how long it was getting, it was impossible. He gave up on trying to control his hair and grabbed his bag, quickly making his way into the kitchen. He absently noted the trash bag of hero merch was gone. Good riddance. Good morning, Aizu. He and his mom sat down for breakfast. Izuku reminded himself to smile. He didn't want to worry her with whatever nonsense was going on with himself. Try as he might, his mom was perceptive. So, Izuku, what happened? There was a trash bag with all your hero stuff in it. Did you do that? Izuku swallowed his food before speaking. Yeah, I did. I think I'm just getting a little old for it. Maybe I could be something other than a hero. It'd be safer for me, right? Izuku wasn't concerned with how easily the lies came out his mouth. He's been lying for a majority of his life. Inko hummed, tapping a finger against the table. That's true, but you know I want you to chase your dreams, right? I'd never deny you that. Izuku smiled, a surprisingly honest one at that. I know, ma. Thank you for that, but I really do think I should look into other stuff. Dreams change, you know? There's a different job that would suit me better. Izuku knew how to placate his mother, what words to say and what tone to say them in. It was something he was proud of, but it was useful. Alright, I believe you. Let me know if there's any way I can support you, okay? Izuku nodded, knowing he wouldn't say a thing to her. Not because he didn't like or trust her, but just because he didn't need to concern her with his problems. Izuku finished his breakfast quickly and left for school, his mom giving him a big hug before she left for work. As soon as he left the house, the smile he wore for his mother fell. Usually when this happened, he'd put on his, in school, smile. It didn't work though. Izuku was frustrated by that. There weren't many things Izuku liked about himself, but his ability to pretend and fake his emotions was one of those things. He shook his head. It didn't matter. It's not like smiling stopped the bullying or anything. He arrived at school. He always arrived earlier than most kids just to avoid them. Not early enough apparently, because when he saw his desk it was covered in words and there was a vase of spider lilies on his desk. Izuku wasn't surprised. He wouldn't make a fuss, he'd just deal with it. He placed the vase on the ground by his desk and got some cleaning wipes to get rid of the graffiti. As he cleaned his desk, more students piled in. A few threw random things like pencils or ball of paper at him. Izuku ignored them. They didn't matter. The feelings of sadness, confusion, anger, and embarrassment weren't there anymore. He just felt down with it all. He sat at his desk and stared at his shoes. If he could get through today, he could get through tomorrow. School was finally over. Izuku had some bruises and burns from Kaken he'd have to take care of, but that was normal to him. Izuku thought the daily abuse was over, that he could head home to his mom and be a somewhat normal teenager. Of course not. Why would he ever think anything would go his way? Hey, Deku. Izuku was about to start sprinting home, but Kaken placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Come here, I just want to talk. The feral look on his face told a different story. Strangely, Kaken was alone. None of his lackeys floating around him. Izuku was dragged into a corner behind a building, wincing as his shoulder was pushed into concrete. F's wrong with you now? Izuku looked up at the explosive boy and couldn't help his eye twitching. Izuku really didn't feel like dealing with this. Izuku just kept his gaze on the ground. He'd let Kaken say whatever he wanted and be done with it. I'm talking to you, dumbass. Izuku couldn't help the scowl on his face. The numbness faded away and anger took its place. Izuku was surprised by that. He normally wasn't the type to get angry at all, but with how Kaken and the world had been treating him, he was getting tired of it. Izuku glared at Kaken. He wasn't going to be a pushover again. Huh? What's that look for? A smug grin appeared across his face. You want to fight? Well, if you want to get your butt kicked, who am I to deny dash? Izuku's body moved on its own again, but instead of rushing to save Kaken, he punched the boy across his face. Kaken took a few steps back, a hand placed on his cheek, and he glared at Izuku. Izuku partially regretted his decision, but also felt reinvigorated. Kaken's smile was downright manic. So that's how you want to be then? His palms sparked and Izuku knew he'd be going home with worse injuries than he'd ever had before. Kaken threw the first punch, of course. Izuku ducked beneath it and scrambled to get behind the boy. Izuku didn't know what he was doing. He's never fought anyone ever. He'd tried to when he was little, but after the first hit he would just curl into himself. Not this time. Izuku was done with it. He'd fight back even if he wasn't able to get a single hit on Kaken. Speaking off, the explosive boy turned around and decked Izuku. He was used to it though. He'd been hit enough times to be able to brush it off. Izuku reached forward and grabbed Kaken's arm, pull him off balance and having him to the floor. Izuku kneed the other boy in the stomach and tried to throw another punch but Kaken caught it. Izuku winced at the stinging of little explosions along his skin. It was a bloody and lawless fight. Izuku suffering from most of the fight, new bruises, a lot of new burns, and probably a concussion. That didn't mean he just laid around and took all the hits, he'd gotten his fair share of punches in too. Even managing to get the taller boy in a headlock, suffocating Kaken longer than he'd meant to. Kaken had panicked and brought his hand up to Izuku's face, sending out an explosion, but neither of them realized how much sweat had accumulated in Kaken's palm. The explosion that resulted from it left Izuku writhing on the ground. Kaken had scooted back, looking on in horror. Izuku kept a hand on his face. He felt all right but there was so much blood he couldn't see. "Sheet Izadash. Don't say sheet." Izuku screamed. He'd never even heard himself yell before. "I don't want to hear it." Izuku looked up at the other boy through blood and hair. Kaken looked scared. Scared like when he was trapped by the sludge villain. Izuku's anger simmered. Why was he freaked out? He's the one who did this. "Just leave me alone, Kaken. Don't talk to me unless it's to apologize." Before Kaken could respond, Izuku took his leave, rushing out of whatever dead-end corner they'd found themselves in to go home. Suddenly, Izuku wasn't so sure he'd be able to get through tomorrow. Izuku shuffled into his house as quickly as he could. He had the overshirt of his Gakuren wrapped around his head to stop the bleeding. Izuku didn't know what a concussion felt like but he assumed he had one. He made his way to the bathroom, stumbling over himself. His mom hadn't called his name so she must still be at work. That was better for him then. He didn't want to freak her out or make her clean up his blood. Izuku grabbed the first aid kit from under the bathroom sink. He didn't have any first aid experience at all but he refused to go to the hospital. His mom, the doctors, they'd ask questions that Izuku couldn't answer. Izuku's thoughts swirled as he carefully washed and bandaged his wounds. The most noticeable was the giant burn on his face. That one was at least unintentional, at least Izuku thinks it was. He could admit their fight had gotten more emotional than intended but still, Izuku thought it was overkill. His right eye was partially damaged, he could still see out of it, but it was more sensitive to the bright bathroom light and everything was slightly blurry. Even his eyelid felt worse, harder to blink, more sluggish. Izuku would just deal with it though. It's the only thing he knew how to do. He took off his shirt to assess the rest of the damage. A few starburst-shaped burns and tons of bruises but nothing too concerning. Izuku lifted himself onto the kitchen sink and started applying the burn ointment he'd gotten. It worked well enough for any damage Kaken's quirk caused. He took a deep breath. His heart was still racing, he needed to calm himself down. He still wasn't sure what he'd say to his mom. Izuku didn't know why but he still didn't want to tell her it was Kaken. He really didn't know why. Maybe he could still say it was him but say it was an accident? It was technically true. Izuku shook his head, he didn't know. He could figure it out later, for now he should focus on his wounds. Nearly everything was bandaged except his head, he wasn't sure how to bandage it. He settled for wrapping it around and tying it in a knot in the back. He feared what his mother would think of it. He hopped off the counter and looked at himself again. It could be worse? He shrugged his Gakuren on again. He probably should have taken a shower before bandaging everything but it was too late now. He sat in his empty room again, staring blankly at the floor. Life really seemed to hate him lately. He glanced at the fire escape exit outside his window. He could just leave. Kaken didn't want him around if he told Izuku to take a swan dive off the roof. His mother wouldn't have to struggle so much if he was gone. No one else would care about him or even notice he was missing. Auntie Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru would be there for his mom, so he didn't have to worry about her being lonely. It all seemed perfect. He wasn't sure where he'd go or what he'd do once he left. Maybe take Kaken's advice. Maybe become a vigilante. Maybe just live a quiet life. No matter what it was, it all sounded better than how he was currently living. Izuku would have thought it over more if he wasn't so emotionally exhausted, but currently he needed a quick fix. The quick fix happened to be running away. Sure, it was cowardly, but that's typical for Izuku Deta Midoriya. The world shunned him so he'd shun the world. It was only fair. He grabbed his bright yellow bag and emptied it, only keeping his hero analysis journals. Even though he revolted them since they were proof he was the creepy villainous stalker, Kaken always said they were his. They were important to him even if they showed he was a freak. He packed whatever else he thought he'd need. Some clothes, some toiletries, some food, his metal water bottle, his phone, laptop, their respective chargers and the house's first aid kit. The last thing he packed was extremely embarrassing and probably weird, but it was the All Might trading card he got when he was younger. Kaken had a matching set, and as much as Izuku hated the other at the moment, the card was still too special to leave behind. He covered himself head to toe, wearing a custom Eraserhead hoodie he made himself, black sweatpants, a green sponge mask and his stupid red corkless people shoes. He hated them, but they're the only thing he can wear without crushing his pinky toe, so they had to stay. He slid his backpack over his shoulder and checked his phone for the time, 8:52 p.m. His mom would be home around. Izuku wondered if he should leave her a note. Wouldn't it just hurt her? Or would it hurt more not knowing what happened to him? In the end he left a single note on his bed, just 2 short sentences. It's not your fault. I love you. Izuku took a few deep breaths, wincing as his ribs ached from the bruises. He'd do this, and if it turned out for the worse he'd come back home. Despite him making his mom's life harder, she always took care of him regardless. He knew she'd accept him if he came crawling back. He pulled open his window and hopped out into the fire escape, walking down the metal stairs slowly so as to not make too much noise. He got to the final step and looked around aimlessly. He really didn't know where he was going. He started in a random direction. He'd figure it out eventually. Izuku walked for around 2 hours, again not in any direction, just away from home. He ended up on the outskirts of the city where an abandoned warehouse resided. Izuku poked around the outside a bit just to make sure it was really abandoned before pushing a broken metal door aside to enter. The warehouse was huge, decrepit, and empty. Izuku spun in a circle as he walked to see it all. He took out his phone and turned on the flashlight. He didn't want to waste the battery, but he needed to know what the warehouse made in the past. It was hard to see with one of his eyes being bandaged and the lack of light, but eventually he made his way over to some piled-up storage containers and looked inside. It was full of hero costumes and support gear. Izuku placed his phone on the ground, the light shining upwards. He grabbed a garment from the box. The fabric felt expensive, not like a cheap knockoff costume. Was this place really a genuine hero gear warehouse? He hadn't heard of the name plastered at the front of the building. Maybe it had gone bankrupt a long time ago. Izuku placed the item back in the box. He doubted there'd be anything he actually needed here, like a comfortable place to sleep or free food. He picked his phone back up and wandered around, peeking into any unlocked doors. Most had raw materials for support items. Some housed fabrics, others had documents and paperwork. Guess the place acted as more than just a warehouse. Izuku stumbled across a room that had foam mats set up on the floor. He couldn't tell what the use of the room was, but it had an open window, a dimmed-out light, and a relatively comfy place to sleep. Izuku claimed it as his own and set his bag down. He turned his phone off and laid down on the mat, careful not to aggravate any wounds on his back. Izuku still wasn't sure if this was the best choice, but he'd find out soon enough. He wanted to be a hero, and if Kaken, All Might, the world denied him, he'd just find his own way. Katsuki was eating breakfast when his mom asked him something weird. "When's the last time you saw Izuku?" She said it innocuously, but Katsuki could hear an edge in her voice. He raised an eyebrow. Why the hell would the hag be asking about Deku? "Yesterday after school." "Why?" Mitsuki sighed. "Inko says she didn't see him at all yesterday, and he hasn't shown up today either. Let me know if you see him at school." Katsuki scrunched his face at that. He'd definitely seen Deku run home after Katsuki lost control of his quirk. Why wouldn't he go home? Katsuki doubted the freak had any friends who'd take him in. Regardless, he just nodded at the hag's words. "Yeah, whatever, I'll let you know." Katsuki rushed down the rest of his breakfast, itching to get his hands on Deku. There was no way he of all people ran away. Deku was a spineless coward. Throwing a few flimsy punches didn't suddenly make him tough. Katsuki kicked on his shoes, grabbed his bag, said bye to his dad on the way out, and yelled to the hag that he was leaving. He needed to see Deku so he could yell at him. He even walked a little faster on his way to school. He wasn't nervous. He didn't get nervous. He was just angry. Even if he hypothetically was worried, he could just turn that worry into anger anyways. He got to his classroom and shoved the extra nobodies aside to open the classroom door, expecting to see Deku sitting in his seat mumbling as always, except he wasn't there. Katsuki looked around the rest of the room, no sign of the green-headed weirdo at all. His desk had the same graffiti it had every morning, but that was it. After telling the extras that followed him around to F off, Katsuki took his own seat, bouncing his leg in anger and not anger as he eyed the door, waiting to see Deku. He hadn't seen Deku for the entire day. Not in any classes, not in lunch, didn't see him leave the school at all. He hadn't shown. Katsuki was certainly not freaking out. The frequent missing? Okay, who cares? It's not Katsuki's fault that useless, quirkless, Deku couldn't handle it. Katsuki ignored any thought that even suggested he was at fault, or that Izuku bled out in an alley because of what Katsuki's quirk did. He was standing at the school gates, waiting for Deku to walk out, but it never happened. He only decided to go home when the sun started setting. Katsuki walked home silently. He didn't like whatever he was feeling. If he could just take whatever emotion this was and turn it into anger, he'd be fine. Katsuki took his hand out of his pocket, that one that burned Deku's face, and glared at it. For once in his life, Katsuki resented his quirk. He didn't like the feeling at all. Katsuki always had amazing quirk control. He trained with his quirk constantly to make sure of that fact, which is why him losing control made no sense. He balled his hand into a fist and shoved it in his pocket again. He could feel the All Might card he and Deku got when they were kids. Katsuki ran a hand down his face. He was not about to get sentimental over some quirkless nobody. He doesn't need Deku. He'd do just fine on his own. He always planned to become the future #1 hero. Deku throwing a tantrum wasn't going to stop him. Katsuki didn't feel sad, he didn't feel worried, he didn't feel guilty. He could replace all of that with anger and get by just fine. He'd tell the hag he didn't see that stupid Deku and move on with his life. Deku had no impact on it. He'd continue on as normal. He hadn't realized he was already home until he was on the doorstep. He pushed open the door, dropped off his bag which he'd return to get later because he always did his homework, and rushed to his room, ignoring the calls of his mom and dad. He was gonna get changed and head to the gym early today. He needed to blow off some steam. Katsuki wasn't worried. Deku would show up tomorrow. He always did. Izuku squinted his eyes as sunlight from the window shone directly in his eye. He sat up and looked at the window, confused for a moment as to where he was. It didn't take long for the memories to return, his impulsive decision to leave home. Izuku didn't feel like going back though, not yet. He sat up straighter and stretched his arms above his head, relaxing with a sigh. If there was one thing Izuku was good at, it was planning. He pulled his back closer and grabbed his notebooks and a pen, then scooted against the wall and got to planning. Izuku's plan for the future. Izuku tapped his pen against his chin. He'd just write down whatever came to mind. Hero stuff. Become a hero, defeat villains, save people. Learn how to fight, important. Make a hero costume, decide on a hero name. Living stuff. Find a steady source of food, preferably without stealing. Get new clothes, learn first aid and take care of wounds, find a place to take showers, avoid being recognized, already unlikely. Izuku couldn't think of any more broad topics to write down, so he'd work on specifics. Although he wanted to work on hero stuff, he knew it'd be best to prioritize his own survival first. The two he wanted to focus on were food and showers, though the latter would be pretty easy to solve. He knew there were public bathhouses and showers nearby. The problem was they cost money. Izuku had no idea what he'd do about that without money. He didn't want to steal, but he would if he had to. He couldn't go out today. He knew his mom would be out looking for him and it'd be best if he just stayed away. So, he had a solution for hygiene. The food situation would be worked on later at night. Although it wasn't the most reliable, there were plenty of first aid videos on YouTube he could watch to make sure he was properly taking care of his wounds. He wasn't concerned about being recognized much at all. The only people who really cared were his mom, Auntie Mitsuki, and Uncle Masaru. As long as he could avoid them and Kakin, there wouldn't be a problem. Izuku placed the notebook down and stood up, stretching once more. Now that there was daylight, he could look through the warehouse more thoroughly. It was a hero warehouse, so there had to be something Izuku could use for his future heroism, technical vigilantism. He checked his phone as he left what was now his bedroom. He purposefully ignored all the missed calls from his mom. He just couldn't bring himself to answer. The time was 9:17 a.m., so Izuku still had lots of time to burn before he could sort out the food situation. He put his phone in his pocket and jogged over to the various warehouse containers from yesterday, able to properly see what each item is with the sunlight filtering through holes in the warehouse's roof. It was miscellaneous hero costumes, nothing Izuku recognized. The warehouse likely made things for students or up-and-coming heroes rather than well-established pros. It was still interesting to look through, and in surprisingly good condition for having been left out for who knows how long. Something in particular caught his eye, a dark green costume with black accents. It even had a red utility belt folded between it. Izuku refolded the costume and set it beside him. He liked it the most out of everything else he saw and could use it for hero technical vigilante work. He was able to fish out another item he considered using. It was a green fabric mask made to resemble a rabbit. It'd only cover his upper face, but Izuku thought it was cool. It had rabbit ears sticking out from the top. One was bent while the other stayed upright. He guessed there were wires between the fabric and that one had bent due to being squished under so many other things. Izuku looked at his randomized, run-down, impromptu hero costume. Call it pathetic, but he actually really liked it. It needed to be cleaned, definitely, but Izuku thought it fit him well enough. Rabbits were his favorite animal and green was his favorite color after all. Maybe he could learn how to make his own support gear? He'd write it down for later. He scooped up his scavenged hero costume and set it inside his room for later. He wasn't brave enough to think he could take in villains currently though. He had a lot of work to do before he could even consider fighting bad guys. He checked his phone again, 9:32 a.m. Izuku sighed. It was going to be a long day. He rubbed at his injured eye. His body still ached all over because of course it did. There was no getting out unscathed when it came to Kaken. He sat back down on the foam mat, which was now his bed, and opened YouTube. Even if he didn't have the right resources or access to a hospital, he could do what he could to prevent infections. Plus heroes were always trained in first aid, so he'd have to learn eventually. He searched up general and basic first aid, along with more specific things about bruises and burn injuries. He'd brought the burn ointment, which would be his saving grace. He reached up to his right eye and carefully unraveled the bandages. He pulled his phone's camera up to look at it more closely. It hadn't gotten any better from how it looked yesterday, bloody and raw. Skin peeled where the damage of Kaken's explosion faded out. His eyelid wasn't fully open either. It settled just a little lower than it usually did. Not enough to impact his field of view much, but enough to be noticeable to anyone else. Everything was still slightly blurry. Izuku sighed. He was really hoping that it would get better. Maybe he'd just give it more time. He returned to the video he was watching and used the water from his water bottle to carefully clean it. Kaken's burns usually faded after 2 weeks. With how bad this one, it'd likely be a month or more before it started clearing up. He sighed again, internally cursing Kaken out. He knew it was, probably, an accident, but he still didn't forgive Kaken for it. Following along with the video's instruction, as many as he could physically follow at least, he rebandaged his eye and moved onto his torso. The wounds there were more par for the course, small, scattered starburst burns that'd fade quickly. Those he knew how to handle. With his very shabby, very inexperienced self-checkup over, he paused to snack on the food he brought with him. He was more snacks than anything, but it was better than starving. Izuku felt strangely at peace though. He thought that when reality caught up with him and he had to deal with all these new struggles that he'd immediately fold and run home, but he actually felt really good. Well, maybe not physically, but mentally he felt better. There was no one to yell at him, push him down, give him new injuries he'd have to hide from his mom, no teachers to antagonize him, no spider lilies or suicide baiting. It was the most at peace he'd been since his diagnosis. His situation wasn't normal in any way, but he felt more normal than he ever had before. He couldn't help but smile at the fact. It was refreshing, it was exciting. He was finally gonna be a hero. No matter what anyone said, he'd help people. It's what he was meant to do, he just knew it. He finished his snacks and crumbled the trash to throw away later. Feeling suddenly very energized and very excited, he wanted to do more physical stuff. Sure, trying to work out after you suffered a beating the day prior went against all the first aid videos he'd just watched. Izuku was too hyped up to care. So he walked out to the main warehouse area and pulled up some at-home workout routine videos. It wouldn't be as good as going to the gym or being professionally trained, but he'd make do. He followed what the person in the video did, starting with stretching and warm-ups before doing simple exercises that didn't need any equipment like push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, and the like. Izuku regretted his decision almost instantly after the first workout set. Izuku reminded himself that trying to go from 0 to 100 never worked. If he wanted to actually start working out, he'd need to start slow, painfully slow with how unmuscular he currently was. Instead of trying to go from no workout to full workout 3 times a week, Izuku decided he'd do warm-ups and stretches every day to start. Once he got used to the warm-ups and stretches, he could move on to simple stuff like said push-ups, sit-ups, and jumping jacks, not too much to overexert himself but enough to build up muscle. Izuku nodded to himself proudly. He really liked making plans and routines. Unfortunately, this made the food problem more prevalent. If he started working out without a consistent diet, he might end up underweight or malnutritioned, which wouldn't be good if he was going to be saving people. He'd stick with the warm-ups but hold off on working out till he found a steady source of healthy food. Izuku's hands itched to write it all down, so he walked back to his room and hastily grabbed his notebooks. As Izuku wrote his plans and everything he'd need to do to become a hero, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hopeful. Izuku didn't regret his decision to run away so far. It was 6:22 p.m. when Izuku considered leaving his hideout. The whole day he'd spent digging through warehouse items, doing random warm-ups, watching video after video on first aid, hero laws, workout routines, villain news, and whatever else he came across. With the sun setting, Izuku figured he'd have a better chance going out and looking for a source of food without his mom or Kaken's family looking for him. He slipped on an all-black hoodie, black jeans that he had no recollection of ever buying, his signature red shoes, and the same green sponge mask he'd worn yesterday. Izuku wondered if it'd be enough. He eyed the fabric rabbit mask he'd found in the support gearbox. That could work. He grabbed the rabbit mask from the folded hero costume pile. He flipped it over in his hands, inspecting it. It was all a thing, somewhat stretchy green fabric, the same color as the costume he'd found if he wasn't mistaken. The only solid part of it were the wires that held up the ears. Though one was bent halfway, he couldn't tell if it was a choice or just general damage. He didn't mind either way. He slipped it over his face and tied it behind his head. It fit him snugly, but not in an uncomfortable way. He took out his phone to see how it looked and was surprised to see that somehow the mask's eyes blinked with his own. Not only that, but with the mask on, it looked like his sclera was black with white irises and no pupils. Izuku took the mask off too. Look again and found his normal eyes. A smile spread across his face. A mask that could match his eyes was so cool, he wondered if it was a quirk. He didn't feel any kind of solid parts around the eyes, and there wasn't any room for electrical parts. He slid the mask on again and looked as the mask's eyes matched his own. He spent a few minutes goofing off, closing one eye, then the other, squinting, widening his eyes, and watched in awe as the mask matched every single one. The mask was now his favorite thing he owned. With the rabbit mask and sponge mask together, his face was fully covered, including the bandages over his right eye. It might be a bit over the top, but Izuku never liked showing his face anyway. He was rather plain looking after all. Though, with the new starburst scar that covered the right side of his face, he's much more recognizable than before, and to think all he had to do was receive a grotesque burn injury. He shook the thought away. He had to focus. He pulled his hood up to cover his short, unruly green hair, stuffed his phone and the All Might trading card in his pocket, and left the safety of his hideout for the first time since he'd gotten there. Izuku couldn't say for certain, but he thought he'd seen something of a food bank when he was aimlessly walking around last night. If he could find out where it was again, he could get dinner for tonight and see if they had any limits or policies against going there daily. Izuku was nervous when he stepped into the main streets. He hadn't realized how attached and used to isolation he'd been. Even before he left home, he never really went anywhere outside of school or home. Where would he go? Who would he go with? Why would he go when home is safer? It led to him being a sort of shut-in, which he was now facing the consequences for. Luckily him being on the shorter side let him move through crowds pretty easily. People were also less likely to pay attention to him. Izuku was about to start aimlessly walking in an attempt to find the food bank when he remembered technology existed. Although his phone was starting to run low on battery, he quickly looked up local food banks in his area and lo and behold, the one he saw before was only a few blocks away. He picked up the pace as he moved towards it. It was only around 7 p.m. but they could have an early closing time. By the time he arrived at the food bank he was only slightly out of breath. He pushed open the door and slowly stepped inside. There were few other people inside but it wasn't packed or anything. Present mic? Izuku blinked multiple times to try and see if he was hallucinating but no, that was definitely the pro-hero present mic. Izuku would listen to his radio show every day. While Izuku was standing in the doorway gaping at the hero, he noticed Izuku and gestured him over. Welcome in, little listener. Need something to eat? Izuku shook himself out of his stupor and walked to the counter, fidgeting nervously with his hands. Yes please if you could. Present Mike laughed loudly, but to be fair he did everything loudly. Coming right up? How does chicken and rice sound? Oh, good. Sounds very good, sir. As Present Mike prepped the food Izuku could see him eye the bright red shoes he had on. Izuku tensed. They wouldn't deny him because he was quirkless, right? It wouldn't be the first time he was denied for it. He looked at Present Mike but the hero didn't say anything. Instead he just stepped back to open up a pot. Steam flowed out as he filled a plate with food. Here you are, and no need for formalities, little listener. Any allergies I should worry about? Present Mike held out the plate of food. Izuku took it carefully in both hands. Oh, and no, I don't think so. I'll take your word for it. Any questions before you eat? Izuku eyed the floor, looking everywhere except the hero's eyes. Oh yes, is there a limit like, can I come back every day or only sometimes? Izuku cursed himself for how much he was stuttering. It usually wasn't this bad. Present Mike laughed again, a tiny bit quieter than before. No, nothing like that. Anyone is allowed to stop by for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Open from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m., k? Usually it isn't me here though, I just happen to have the week off. Izuku nodded. It was an ever better offer than expected. Chicken and rice was an amazing meal for being completely free. Izuku bowed politely and took his leave, sitting at an empty table in the corner. Izuku was still reeling from meeting a hero up close like that. He'd always spectated fights but police tape always prevented people from getting too close. Izuku pulled down his sponge mask and pulled up the rabbit mask. A little worried Present Mike would notice the bandages and ask questions but was otherwise excited to eat. He was surprised Present Mike didn't ask about it. He didn't really ask any questions at all. No, what do you need food for? Where are your parents? Why are you so nervous? Why are you wearing a mask? Why do you need to come back every day? All of which Izuku had lies and half-truths prepared for. It was a big relief he wasn't interrogated when all he wanted to do was eat. Izuku stopped stalking and finally took a bite of the food. It was delicious, which didn't really surprise him. Present Mike seemed like the type to be really reliable and be able to do lots of things including cooking. Izuku ate peacefully, occasionally checking the others in the room. There were only two others, a boy with purple hair that seemed to stand up, and a girl with black scales along her body. Izuku silently wondered what the two's quirks were. The boy didn't have any kind of physical aspect from what he could see, so he went on to theorize about the girl's quirk. He wished he would have brought his notebooks even if all he did was doodle in them. Izuku ended up finishing his meal quicker than he thought, so he put his sponge and rabbit mask back on to return his plate to Present Mike, who took it with a big grin on his face. So? How was it? Come on, 5 stars. Izuku smiled, and even if Present Mike couldn't see it, it was clear in his voice. Yeah. 5 stars. Glad to hear it. Can I expect to see you tomorrow? If we know how many people are gonna show, then we know how much food to make. Izuku nodded sheepishly. Why yes, I'll be here tomorrow too. For all 3 meals hopefully. Present Mike gave an odd look to the hopefully part but didn't say anything. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow then, little listener. Be safe. Izuku nodded as he left the food bank. Overall it was a way more pleasing experience than he thought it'd be. He was expecting to be asked a million questions, having to lie and explain himself, then asked why he was wearing a mask, maybe be accused of being a villain before figuring out he was quirkless and kicking him out. So yeah, way better. Izuku walked back to hideout with more energy than before, the floppy ear of his mask bouncing with every step. It was oddly calming to look at. Izuku checked the time, 9. He'd spent more time there than he wanted to, but it didn't really matter in the end. He made it back home without any issues and was able to let out a huge sigh of relief at being in familiar territory. Izuku slid into his room. The dim, flickering light didn't help him see much, but at least it wasn't pitch dark. His phone was really running low on battery. He would have asked Present Mike if he could charge it there, but 1. He didn't bring his charger, and 2. Izuku thought it'd be rude to ask. His laptop, however, was still at full charge. He sat in his foam mat bed and pulled it out of his bag, the light from the screen momentarily blinding his only usable eye. After getting used to the light, he looked something up he probably shouldn't have. His own name. A bad idea, he knew, but he needed to know. He typed his name and scrolled, reading through article titles. It was clear his mom reported him missing, which he was thankful for. It made his secret hero thing harder, but it showed she cared. There were a lot of articles that were just straight-up nonsense though, some saying he was kidnapped, probable, others saying he became a villain, not true, and others saying he had killed himself, the most likely if we're being painfully honest. Izuku clicked off the tap. He saw what he wanted to. There were more important things he needed to inform himself on, like laws. Now Izuku wasn't stupid. He knew what he was doing was vigilantism and not heroism, strictly by law. He knew heroes would try to stop him, that he'd be their enemy in some way, shape, or form. He dreaded it. Of course he did. He didn't want to go against heroes even if they've severely disappointed and failed him in every way possible. There were F-ed-up heroes. People who Izuku didn't think deserved to be called one endeavor, and those useless heroes who stood around while Kaken suffocated, but there were also plenty of amazing heroes too. It was a complicated gray area. Not all heroes were good, not all villains were bad, and vigilantes thrived in the gray area. Izuku knew he'd be going against the law and he was prepared too. That's why he'd learn about them, that way it'd be easier for him to exploit loopholes. If there was one upside to being quirkless, it's that sometimes people forgetting about you actually works in your favor. In pre-quirk times, vigilantism was trying to take down any threat yourself without calling authorities. In current times, in order to be charged with vigilantism you had to have used a quirk to fight. Izuku didn't have one at all, so technically he wasn't committing vigilantism. He'd still go over the laws regardless, and maybe gather some more info on the local heroes. He'd be spending a lot of time with them after all, so he'd better get familiar with them. Izuku sincerely regretted how much time he spent on his laptop. He didn't even know so much time had passed until the thing literally died. Izuku rubbed his eye. The screen lights having long irritated it, Izuku just ignored the feeling as long as possible. He yawned. He knew he was tired. He was just putting it off to keep browsing online hero, vigilante, and villain forums. He tried to check what time it was, but with his phone and laptop dead he had no luck. It didn't really matter. Izuku knew it was time to go to sleep. He set his laptop aside and laid down the foam mat, facing upwards. He made a mental note to try and get a real bed, or some pillows and blankets. And also a light, and maybe some books. Izuku just reminded himself to make his new home feel like home. It would eventually. And eventually he'd be a hero. He'd help people. He'd be worth something. He wouldn't be a burden. He could be loved properly. Izuku could only dream of the day. And so, dream he did. Dreams of heroes actually saving him, of Kaken being nice, of him having a pyrokinesis quirk, of him being normal, of him being a hero. He was absolutely sure it would happen. He'd make it happen. He was tired of being put down, of people ignoring him. He'd make himself known despite the world ignoring him. He wasn't going to let people deny him anymore. One day, it'd be his turn to be a hero. Katsuki was sitting in class thinking about how his life was crumbling around him. He was dealing with it in the only way he knew how, be angry at everyone and anything and always double down. It wasn't working very well. After Deku fell off the face of the earth, his parents and Auntie Inko found out how he treated Deku. He'd never seen Auntie Inko look so devastated and betrayed. Katsuki wouldn't ever admit it out loud, but he felt guilty. Not guilty over Deku, just guilty over Auntie Inko. Deku was the problem, Inko just happened to be his mom. So now he has to go to therapy and anger management classes to avoid getting permanent marks on his record. They kept interrogating him on where Deku went, but he really didn't know. He accidentally blasted the fucker's face, then he left and ran away of his own volition. Katsuki had no part in it. That didn't matter to everyone else though. People kept saying he killed Deku. Which is bullshit cause the fucker's not even dead. Katsuki refused to believe Deku would actually give up. He was almost as stubborn as Katsuki himself sometimes. Katsuki knew Deku more than anyone else. He knew how Deku acted more than his mom did. Katsuki knew he was alive, he just didn't know where. He still convinced himself he didn't care. The quirkless freak could run off and play pretend hero in the dark for however long he wanted. It didn't affect Katsuki. If he kept telling himself that, it'd become true eventually. It's not like he was actually gonna get better anyway. He didn't know why everyone else was trying. If anything, he was getting worse. More angry, more combative, more closed off. He still couldn't get rid of the sick, sunken feeling in his chest, and it was pissing him off. It got more suffocating every day. He felt like he was missing something, he just didn't know what. He eyed the matching All Might trading card he and Deku had. Katsuki would ignore everything and push through middle school, then become the #1 hero. Nothing else mattered. Izuku didn't matter. Izuku once again awoke to blinding sunlight. Izuku quickly sat up and glared at the window. He'd find a way to get curtains later. He took a few minutes to stretch, yawn, and generally allow himself to wake up properly. He went to check his phone for the time when he remembered it was dead. He'd have to see if he could charge it at the food bank later. He took a sip from his water bottle, which needed refilling soon too, and got ready to head to the food bank. He had no way to tell what time it was, but considering how late he fell asleep, it should be late enough for the food bank to be open. He switched into some new clothes, a dark blue Merco hoodie and tan cargo pants. Before covering his face, he took a few minutes to take care of his face wound. Using his last remaining water to clean it and apply more ointment, careful about avoiding blisters. Izuku would have to see if he could find painkillers at some point too, because his body still hurt all over. Anyway, with his wound rebandaged, he put on the sponge and rabbit mask, grabbed his phone charger, the All Might card, and left his hideout for the second time. He pulled his hood up as he walked to the main street. His face might be covered, but not a lot of people had green hair like his, so it'd be best to cover it. The main street was busier than last night. Izuku carefully made his way through the crowds. Wincing in pain a few times as people bumped into his right side, he resorted to keeping a hand on his face to prevent aggravating it any more. He slowed his pace when the food bank entered his view. He was right about it being open. There were far more people from last night. Around 8 other guests sat inside. Izuku pushed the door open and walked in, hands still on his eyes. "Hey again, little listener. Everything all right?" Izuku involuntarily flinched at the voice. He quickly pulled his hand away from his face and wiped it on his hoodie despite there being nothing to wipe off. "Why, sir? I'm okay." He walked to the counter again. "If you're sure, if you need a first aid kit, we've got one in the back." Izuku shook his head. It would be helpful, but he didn't want to burden Present Mike of all people. "And no, you don't have to worry, it's all tea taken care of. May I have breakfast, please?" Izuku begged the conversation to be over. Luckily, Present Mike obliged with no more questions as he grabbed a clean bowl from under the counter. "Coming right up." Izuku looked around the room as the hero prepared his food. The 2 people he saw yesterday weren't here. It was all new people. There were a few adults, but most of the people looked younger than Izuku. Silently wondered why they were here, if any of their stories were similar to Izuku's. He returned his eyes to the counter when he heard a small clank. He saw a bowl of miso soup waiting for him. "Hope you like it." I will, but I also had a question." Izuku carefully took the bowl in his hands. "What's up?" Present Mike leaned an elbow on the counter. Could I charge my phone here? I wasn't sure if it was allowed or not, but my phone's dead." "For sure. This place is here to help everyone, whether they need food, or a place to charge something, or a public bathroom. It's no problem for us." Izuku quickly nodded. That was good to know. "Okay, thank you." He made sure to thank the hero as he grabbed his food and made his way to the same table he sat yesterday, which thankfully was empty. He set his food down and pulled out the charger from his hoodie pocket. He plugged it into the nearby outlet. Once he confirmed it was actually charging, he sat back down. He pulled his masks off, being more careful of the bandages since it'd be jostled so much earlier. Izuku winced as he prodded the bandages. He really wanted painkillers. He'd just have to deal with it for now. He took the first bite of his food. Just like yesterday, it tasted amazing. As he ate, he wondered if the food bank was more of a net loss than a net gain. He wasn't sure how it worked, but surely serving so many people 3 meals a day for free cost a lot? Izuku didn't want to be ungrateful though, so he just accepted and mentally thanked Present Mike for what he was doing. When he noticed his phone light up, he reached across the table to grab it. He had even more missed calls from his mom, which he continued to ignore. There were even calls from Auntie, Uncle, and Kaken. Izuku guessed Auntie stole Kaken's phone to make the calls. He doubted Kaken would try calling Izuku of his own free will. Moving past all the missed phone calls, he checked the date. It was April 20th, 10:43 a.m. Izuku hummed and noted the date away. His main focus was going back to the hero, vigilante, and villain forums he'd be reading last night. The hero forums were par the course. Izuku was familiar with them since that's where he spent a majority of his screen time at. The vigilante and villain forums were new and interesting. There were a lot of complex and in-depth discussions about law, discrimination, what categorizes someone as a vigilante or villain, and so on. Izuku loved reading those discussions and even joined in on a few. It was really informative. He checked the latest post in our villains. Hero killer, Stain, on the rise once again. As per public police documents, many reports of the hero killer Stain have been filed. Mostly bystanders and civilians report the sighting, but there have been a few heroes who were attacked. Please read more here to stay informed. As always, be safe. Stain has yet to attack any innocent people, but he's still an unpredictable killer and it's better to be cautious. Izuku clicked on the link in the post. It led to an article about the villain mentioned. It wasn't a new name to Izuku. As someone who was obsessed with heroes, of course he'd hear about the villains killing and permanently injuring them. He skimmed through the article. He already knew most of the information there, so he switched back over to the Reddit post. He scrolled through comments as he ate his food. At Ackeldenverben, are we sure he's classified as a villain? This seems more like vigilant work to me. At Thewa only replied to at Ackeldenverben, yes, it's villainy. Killing people is never acceptable no matter the reasoning. At Shestrojanofmi Beef replied to at Ackeldenverben, I think if he just didn't kill them then it'd be vigilantism YK? At Thewa only replied to at Shetrojanofmi Beef, so permanently injuring people so severely they're forced to retire early is considered vigilantism and not villainy to you? Are skewed morals trendy now? The comments section devolved into arguments over what counted as vigilantism and what counted as villainy. Arguments like that were way too common in Izuku's opinion. He shut his phone off as he finished his food. He could continue browsing when he was home. He walked back to the counter and handed his bowl off to a random employee. He used the food bank's bathroom and cleaned himself up a little. He'd make sure to bring his toothbrush and toothpaste tomorrow. He stepped out and returned to his seat. His phone was nearly fully charged, which was good enough for Izuku. He unplugged it and stuffed it back in his pockets. With one last look over the room, Izuku left the food bank. He has a lot of things he needs to do to become a proper hero. Vigilante, well, whatever, he would still save people. Katsuki stared at his phone. It had been 2 weeks since Deku up and left, and there was still no sign of him. Katsuki tried being his usual self, but sometime after the first week he started feeling off. He couldn't pinpoint the emotion, which just set him off even more. Katsuki felt like he was waiting for something, and it was not Deku. It had to be something else. The mandatory therapy was starting to get to him too. He tried to be angry and push the dumbass therapist away, but her and her F but star eyes were persistent as hell. He didn't know how many times he could tell her to F off only for her to respond with, "That's not something we say to people trying to help." The urge to explode her exceeded any urge he'd had to explode Deku. He was seriously exhausted. Everything seemed to tire him out now when before he had an endless amount of anger to fuel him. Stargirl, therapist, whatever her name was, says he's worried. and feeling guilty, and panic attacks are normal, like she knows what the heck is going on in his head. Not even he knows what the hell is going on in his head. He vehemently ignored anything and everything she said, as long as he didn't get those permanent marks and was allowed to go to UA. She could say whatever she wanted. Throughout all this seething he was doing his homework. He wasn't going to slack off just cause some quirkless nobody left his side. He needed good grades to get into UA. Honestly, with Decagon everything seemed to annoy Katsuki, his parents, his teachers, his therapist, the annoying extras that followed him around. School annoyed him, his house annoyed him, being outside annoyed him, somehow even training was starting to annoy him. Katsuki needed it to stop. He needed things back the way they were before. Katsuki was even having trouble using his quirk, which had never happened before. Anytime he flexed his palm to get sparks going, they fizzled out almost immediately. He didn't understand what was going on. The most he could do was burn excess sweat, anything more, and it just fizzled out like a dying star. And no, trauma from hurting other people with your quirk seems to be limiting you physically was not a real reason. His therapist really just said whatever she wanted. It was agonizing. He wanted to train and get stronger, work on his quirk control, but he couldn't do that if he couldn't even activate his quirk. Katsuki faced planted into his desk. Life was bullshit, who cared? He looked at his All Might card again. It had become a habit at this point. He knew that the loser was still alive. Katsuki would wait until he showed his face again, then he'd yell at the freak for leaving him behind and running off to who knows where. He'd wait for Izuku, no matter how long it took. Izuku looked at his phone. It had been 2 weeks since he left home. He'd say he made a lot of progress. He was finally starting to build up some muscle. Most of his wounds had healed save for the one over his right eye, and he'd been learning how to fight. He couldn't say whether or not he was good since he didn't have anyone to spar with, but he certainly wasn't as helpless as before. He even learned what style fit him best. Turns out it was kicks. Being light on his feet came naturally to him. He even got into parkour, and while he was still an utter train wreck at that, he knew it'd be useful in the future. With all his new free time came even more hobbies, one of which included making support items. He'd watched this pink-haired girl on YouTube who made her own support items. Sure, they always blew up, but she would always fix it so it didn't blow up. He used scrapped and damaged parts from the warehouse to make his own, much simpler, items, most of which were actually clothing and not mechanical. The one mechanical item he did have was a respirator. He'd repaired a broken one to a usable state and even painted it using some paint he'd stolen. And yes, Izuku was not able to avoid stealing things. He tried, but it had to happen eventually. Aside from the respirator, he'd also patched together some leg braces that went up to his thigh, gloves with a rough texture on the palm for better grip, and claws that could dig into metal. He was proud of that one. He also found some red bandages that were supposed to increase the body durability when wrapped around it. He hadn't been able to test it yet, but he would when he went on his first patrol. Which he planned to do tonight. He'd had breakfast and lunch at present mixed food bank, but he'd be skipping dinner in favor of hyping himself up for his first patrol. He gathered his hero costume and began putting it on. It fit him near perfectly. The suit itself was a little loose, but it didn't bother him. Izuku set his phone against some machinery in the warehouse to get a better look at himself. The suit itself was a dark green with dark blue accents. It had short sleeves that ended in white cuffs. He had the red bandages wrapped around his arms to help with the few gymnastic moves he'd incorporated into his style, along with the clawed gloves that had a green texture on the palms that allowed for better grip. He'd practiced with the gloves and was able to scale walls easily. He had a red utility belt around his waist. It had an assortment of items from bandages, medical wipes, a burner phone he'd stolen for police calls, his own personal phone, and of course the All Might card he also carried around. He wanted to bring a notebook for on-the-go analysis too, but it was too big to fit. He'd settled for stuffing it in the space between the suit and the belt. It dug into his side a little, but it wouldn't be obstructive. In the middle of his thighs were where the dark blue leg braces started. It went all the way down to his ankles where he tucked it into his red high tops. Around the knee there was a second brace in the same green color as the suit. Overall, Izuku thought it looked kinda professional. It was Frankenstein using bits and pieces of actual professional costumes and support gear, so he technically wasn't lying. He moved the respirator that hung around his neck over his mouth. He was able to breathe clearly and it'd hopefully block out any gas or chemical-based quirks. After that he slipped on the rabbit mask. He had to push his hair out of his eyes to get it on. He hadn't realized how long his hair had gotten either. Izuku patted himself down. He thought he was ready, but he went over a mental checklist anyway. After this patrol, once he started becoming more well-known, things would have to change. He wouldn't just be able to stroll into Present Mix Food Bank if he was a vigilante, he'd have to sneak into public showers, steal even more things. He wasn't happy about it, but if it meant he could save people then he'd just have to accept it. Izuku flapped his hands up and down to calm himself down. He could do this. He glanced around his room, now personalized to Izuku. The foam mat had been replaced by a cheap mattress. He had actual pillows and blankets, and fairy lights hung around the room that ran off of solar energy. It felt like home to Izuku, and that was all that mattered. Now that he was sure everything was ready, and double and triple checked everything he already checked, he could actually start his patrol. He left his hideout and took to alleyways first. It was 10 at night, and if Izuku was a villain, he wasn't. He'd make sure his crimes were committed under the cover of darkness. He went to the busier streets first. More people meant more opportunities for villains to seize. Once he got to the main streets, he scaled a building to get to the rooftop. He'd rather have the drop on any villains he found. Quite literally. Using his very mediocre parkour skills, he jumped from rooftop to rooftop, keeping an eye and ear out for anyone who needed help. It was difficult with his right eye still being damaged and it being night, but he'd manage. Izuku spent 10 or so minutes hopping around like a lost rabbit before he considered switching locations, that is until he heard a shriek. He flinched and looked in the direction it came from. He moved quickly, hopping over rooftops, under stray balconies, ducking through power lines until he arrived at the scene of the crime. From the rooftop he was perched on, he could see a tall, lanky man with long, clawed fingers cornering a woman with short blue hair. The man was going on and on about how the woman disrespected him, and he needed to teach her a lesson. He put his hands on her and she pushed him back, causing the two to start fighting. Izuku didn't waste any time. He leaped off the building and aimed his legs directly at the man's head. Izuku felt and could almost hear the impact. Izuku landed in a crouch, his hands placed on the floor between his legs. The man stood up on shaky legs, rubbing his jaw where Izuku hit him. He looked incredibly dazed but shook his head and turned to glare at Izuku. Izuku eyed the woman behind him, motioning with his hand for her to leave. She nodded and ran down the alley away from the two. Nothing changed about Izuku on the outside, but on the inside he was giddy, feeling all sorts of pride and accomplishment at having saved someone for the first time. He snapped back to the fight when he heard footsteps quickly approach. The man was sprinting towards Izuku, his clawed hands flexed and ready to stab. Izuku dodged the first swipe, then the second, then landed a kick in the man's side. It didn't stall him for long though, as he kept swinging his claws wildly. Izuku steadied his breaths. He was doing good. The man was clearly emotional and it was making him leave himself open. Izuku just had to stay calm and take advantage of it. After ducking under another clawed swipe, Izuku grabbed the man's shoulder, pulled him down, and promptly kneed him in the stomach. That caused the man to stumble, tripping over himself and nearly losing his balance. Izuku took the chance to get another hit in, if he could just restrain him. Izuku landed another kick in the man's side, causing him to fall and hit his head on the concrete. Izuku internally apologized. He hadn't meant to do that. With the man on the ground, Izuku flipped him so his face was to the ground and grabbed his arms, placing them behind the man's back as if Izuku were actually arresting the villain. It was at this moment Izuku realized he didn't have HNDCFFs. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out the bandages. They do for now, he'd just have to bring rope next time. The man squirmed beneath Izuku, but he ignored it, focusing on tying the man's hands and legs together to prevent him from running. The entire time the man swore like a sailor, saying Izuku wouldn't get away with this, which caused Izuku to roll his eye. Izuku stepped back from the now restrained man and got out his burner phone to properly report the crime. Izuku couldn't hold back the grin on his face as it rang. He actually did it. He defeated a villain and saved someone. He heard his phone stop ringing and a voice on the other side speak, asking him what the emergency was. Izuku stuttered a bit before he found his words. "Oh yes. I'm over in an alley by, what was it again? Oh, An alley behind Imono's clothing and accessory store. By Block 27th. I'm reporting a villain who was threatening and attacking a woman. Didn't get her name. The operator asks him a few more questions, whether he's still in danger or if anyone's injured. Izuku proudly admits he took down the villain and that everything's alright. The operator informed him they're sending police over. Izuku thanked them and hung up. Although Izuku believed he did the right thing, vigilantism is illegal and it'd be stupid for him to stand around and get detained by police, not to mention he's technically considered missing. So, he used his clawed gloves to climb up a building and make his way home. Izuku landed in front of his warehouse with a thud. Brushing off whatever dirt managed to get on his costume, he ran inside, practically tripping over himself with excitement. He did it. He really did it. He couldn't believe it. He was finally gonna be a hero. He made his way back into his room. He wouldn't be able to sleep with the traces of adrenaline in his system, so he'd spend more time online. Who knows? Maybe the person he saved would post about him? He changed into more comfortable clothes, a shirt that said, "shirt," in English and some basketball shorts. He sat on his dingy mattress and pulled out his laptop. Sure, it hadn't even been more than 20 minutes since he defeated the villain, but in this day and age Izuku wouldn't be surprised if someone was live tweeting their own death. He pulled up all 3 forums, Hero, Vigilant, and Villain, and scrolled through each to see any mention of him and his own vigilante escapades, and there. He pulled up a post from someone named Fishgirl Summer. New vigilante? Hello everyone. I've been lurking in this forum for a long time and wanted to know if anyone knew about this. So I'm in Mizudafu and I went on this date with a guy. He had a billion red flags that I should have ignored, but hindsight is 20/20. So anyway, date went horribly. He's a complete a-hole, so I walked out of the store we were shopping in. He really took me out to buy clothes cause he didn't like the way I dressed like. So I go through a side door into this alley and he follows me, so now I'm starting to freak out for obvious reasons. He starts yelling at me about how I'm not being respectful to him and that he's an amazing guy who I need to give a chance to. He puts an arm on my shoulder, which no? So I pushed him off and we started fighting. I think I'm 100% gonna die in this alley, right? Then from above, probably from the roof, someone jumps down and just dropkicks the creep in his face. So now we're both frozen because, what the hell? The person was dressed in green and had a rabbit mask, couldn't tell how old they were, or whether they were a boy or girl or anything. But their hair was on the longer side if it helps identify them. Anyway, they tell me to leave and I do, no reason for me to stick around. I have no idea who they were, but I looked up, Green Rabbit Hero, and nothing showed up. So are they a vigilante? I haven't seen them on this sub either, but I'm really curious now. I've just been calling them Jackrabbit, but if anyone knows what they actually go by, then let me know. And if they somehow find this, thank you for helping me, Jackrabbit. By the end of it, Izuku could feel himself tearing up. He sniffled and tried to clear the water from his eyes. He wasn't expecting anything like this. He thought maybe they'd just say they saw a new vigilante, but they thanked him. The name Jackrabbit swirled in his head. It felt special knowing it was a name given to him and not something he chose. He scrolled down to the comments. At Pro223, I've never heard of them, probably knew then. Do you know if they used excessive force to take down the creep? Some vigilantes take it way too far. At Fishgirl Summer replied to at Pro233, sorry, I don't know. I left when they told me to and didn't see the rest. I did look up the creep's name though and found he got arrested. His face is a little bruised, but he seems fine otherwise. At Prino223 replied to at Fishgirl Summer, that's good then. Sick of seeing people who claim to be vigilantes killing people and using unnecessary force. At Catstravaganza, let's go new vigilante and in Mizudafu? At Imp the Flyinth Wall, alright everyone, time to make a page for them on Vigilante Wiki. At Whiteothecalidophin replied to at Imp the Flyinth Wall, yeah, but it's not like we have enough info on them. It'd help if Op could give more details. At Fishgirl Summer replied to at Whiteothecalidophin, sorry. What do you want to know? The whole interaction went by quickly, but I'll still see if I can answer anything. At Whiteothecalidophin replied to at Fishgirl Summer, can you give a more detailed physical description? Like height, build, maybe skin, hair, eye color? At Fishgirl Summer replied to at Whiteothecalidophin, sure. They were shorter than me and I'm 5, they looked skinny. Now that I think of it, they were probably a child or at least really young. They were covered head to toe, but I think they had lighter skin? And don't know if it was their mask, but their eyes were black with white irises and pupils. They had green hair too. Does that help? At hideout replied to at fishgirlsummer, yeah, that helps. I'll add it to their page here. At L14R_L14R, Jackrabbit's a pretty cool name. Wonder why they chose a rabbit theme in the first place? At fishgirlsummer replied to at L14R_L14R, not sure, but the way they landed on the ground after they kicked the creep was kinda like a rabbit? Izuku scrolled on, reading more miscellaneous comments, most simply curious about him. He clicked on the link that hideout added and it brought him to a Vigilante wiki page. He'd seen a ton of hero wiki pages but hadn't taken the time to browse the Vigilante's pages. His was incredibly bare bone, just the description, fishgirlsummer, gave alongside estimated age height with his gender labeled NA. Izuku got an idea and a grin spread across his face. Was it stupid? Definitely. Would he do it anyway? Definitely. He signed out of his main account. His username was literally All Might and you wouldn't believe what it took to actually get it. So even if All Might SCKED and personally killed Izuku's childhood dream, he still kept the username. And he made a new account and named it Jackrabbit. He was pleasantly surprised to find out the username was available. He would have hated it if he had to name it like Jackrabbit123456789 or something. With his new account, he went back over to fishgirlsummer's post and commented, "At Jackrabbit, I'm glad you were able to get away safely. Smiley face, I really like the name Jackrabbit. I think I'll use if you don't mind, laughing face." Click to see image. He included a picture for proof. It was just the upper half of his head showing his mask and green hair in front of a blank concrete wall. He hoped it would suffice. Nearly immediately he started getting comments. At fishgirlsummer replied to at Jackrabbit, "OH my goodness? Hi. OMG, I'm so glad you found this. Really, thank you for helping me." At fridge_city, "Holy sheet, is it actually them?" At fishgirlsummer replied to at fridge_city, "I think so. The mask and hair look exactly the same." At hideout permission to post this photo on your Vigilante wiki page? At Jackrabbit replied to at hideout permission granted. Go for it. At BBQBBY replied to at Jackrabbit, "Please don't. Get arrested." Folded hands. Mizutafu has like no vigilantes and the heroes slack off around here, so we need you. Broken heart wilted flower. At Jackrabbit replied to at BBQBBY, "I'm happy to help." Izuku stayed up till almost 3 a.m. responding to random comments and queries, careful not to give out any info that'd make him easy to identify outside of his vigilante persona. He was starting to get tired. If he wanted to patrol again tomorrow, he'd need to get at least a few hours of sleep. He closed his laptop and set it next to his bed before curling up in the blankets, the green fairy lights around his room lulling him to sleep. He didn't regret his decision at all. Now he was really starting his vigilante life. It had been a few days since he debuted as a vigilante and Izuku had figured out a routine for himself, not only for his vigilante work but his day-to-day stuff too. There were still things he had to sort out before he could say he has a stable life, but compared to how things were his first day running away, it was a major improvement. With his vigilantism on the rise, Izuku stopped going to present Mick's food bank. It was too risky since the hero could end up recognizing Izuku. So he'd resorted to stealing again. He paid when could, using whatever money he could get from villains, but most of the food always went unpaid for. For hygiene, he'd just sneak into the public baths and showers and leave before anyone noticed him. Now, Izuku wasn't sure if should be proud to admit this, but he'd also stolen a generator and solar panels and figured out how to hook everything together for iffy yet reliable power. It was one of the best things he did too. Izuku was a bit worried over how not guilty he felt over stealing all these items, as well as technically breaking into places he shouldn't be in. He was committing crimes which would mark him as a villain regardless of if he saved people. He'd just have to hope the heroes didn't mind too much. Either way, semi-stable solo living. Izuku was proud of himself and of how resourceful he'd been. It had been a week since the first time he'd defeated a villain and he made it routine to do nightly patrols at around 9 to 10 p.m. The number of villains, jackrabbits caught has gone up to 12, and more people are mentioning him online. Izuku didn't think things could get much better than they are now. On the subject of his vigilantism, he was currently getting ready to go on patrol. It'd be his 8th day of vigilantism, or pseudo-heroism as he liked to call it. The downside to becoming more well-known online meant villains were also more likely to recognize him. It made fighting villains a bit harder, but not by much. They knew who he was, but they'd never fought him before, and there weren't any recordings of Izuku online, only the one cropped photo he'd uploaded on his Jackrabbit account. Izuku shook his head to clear his thoughts. He had his full vigilante outfit on and was ready to start his patrol. It was a little earlier than he normally went out, but by the time he was in the twisting alleyways of Mizutofu it'd be late 9 p.m., so it worked out. He left his hideout, readjusted his rabbit mask, and scaled a nearby building to make his way deeper into the city. Mizutofu's nightlife had been thriving lately. It probably had something to do with Midnight's new late-night talk show. Izuku made a mental note to check it out when he got home. Izuku continued hopping from building to building, eventually climbing atop a 5-story and perching on the end of it. He didn't really know why or how his habits became more animal-like, but personally he blamed the Reddit threads that theorized about his having rabbit habits. He looks down at the city and scans the darkened streets for any shady behavior. A block away he could see 2 men talking, one holding a wad of cash and the other had a briefcase. Izuku squinted his eye. A drag deal? He hopped off his perch and hopped across the stoplight to position himself above the 2 men, intent to listen in. He didn't want to jump in before he knew the situation. I'm telling you it works. I'd even be willing to let you try it out now. A free sample, yeah? The man with the briefcase spoke. He had long, slicked-back black hair, shark teeth, and sounded like he'd been smoking cigarettes since the age of the other man, who was as skinny as a skeleton and had a third eye on the center of his forehead, rubbed his neck. I dunno, man. Heard the hero's been tracking this sheet down. I don't want to get arrested for having it. The businessman laughed. Now don't worry about something like that. Trust me, Karuto, with this the police wouldn't be able to stop you in a million years. Karuto sighed. All right. It's called Trigger, right? You can get me it whenever. Businessman smiled widely and took Karuto's money. Yup, Trigger, and I'm your best bet if you ever want to get your fix. Don't forget I'm selling to you at a lower price than anyone else. Karuto nodded and took the briefcase. Izuku thought now was a good time to intervene, seeing as he just witnessed a completed drag trade. He hopped down from the building and landed on top of Karuto, grabbing the briefcase of Trigger and tossing it up the building he was just won. Izuku didn't know what Trigger did, but he wasn't going to let either of the villains use it. The businessman stalled, clearly not expecting Izuku's company. Wanting to make this fight a quick one, Izuku leaned down and grabbed Karuto by the arm and threw him over his shoulder towards the businessman. Izuku pulled out restraint tape and tied the 2 men up before they could untangle themselves from each other. Both of them looked at Izuku dazed and confused. The way Izuku took down villains was unconventional, but it certainly worked. He ignored the men's insults and threats as he used his burner phone to report the crime. With police on the way, Izuku clawed his way up the building and opened the briefcase. He'd have to investigate what Trigger was when he had the time and see if it was something he should pay attention to. The box had vials that looked like it could be injected directly into the body. Izuku turned the vial around in his hands. The businessman said if Karuto used this the police wouldn't be able to stop him. That meant it was likely a stimulant or steroid made to increase a person's strength or quirk in some way. He placed the vial back in its place, locked the briefcase up, and dropped it back down where the 2 men were tied up. He'd let the police handle the drags. Speaking of, Izuku continued on with his patrol as he heard the police sirens near. With 12 now 14 villains restrained by him, the police and heroes were taking notice. He wasn't a huge case since he avoided hurting the villains too much, but the same could not be said for his theft cases. He was more infamous for the strange and difficult things he'd steal than his vigilante work, which did make him upset. He put way more effort in saving people than he did with stealing. Security just happened to be incredibly lax in Mizutofu. He had feeling that'd change due to him and all the odd things he'd stolen so easily. Izuku did laps around the city. There were a few muggers or thieves, but they were easy to take care of. Izuku was only slightly bothered when a thief he'd restrained said Izuku and her were in the same situation. Izuku was not a villain. He'd dialed in 4 more cases to the police, who knew him as Jackrabbit by now, before calling it a wrap and making his way home. He made his way home slowly, enjoying the city's nightlife and the sound of people going about their day. Izuku knew his life was strange. Even from the beginning, he never lived a normal life. Sometimes he wondered what it would have been like if he was born with a normal quirk. Would Kaken have been nicer? Could he have actually been a hero? He pushed the thoughts away. It didn't matter now. He was a hero in his own way, a quirkless vigilante, and proud of it. Izuku finally saw his warehouse come into view, but with it came another silhouette. Izuku lowered his stance, looking down from a building at the figure. It was an older-looking man in a tacky purple suit with short gray hair and small round glasses. Izuku had an idea of who it was. Since he'd taken to prowling more low-level villain files, he was pretty sure the man was the C-rank villain Jiren. Izuku hopped down. The man wasn't known to be a fighter. Izuku would probably be alright. The man welcomed him with open arms and a Cheshire grin. "Ah, Jackrabbit, there you are." Jiren wouldn't be able to tell with the mask, but Izuku was glaring at him. "Why are you in front of my house? Do I need to turn you in?" He crossed his arms, thumping his foot against the ground in annoyance. "Seriously, who just shows up like this? Don't be like that. I doubt you'd call in a villain so close to your home. I could just drag your body?" Jiren paused, then ignored what Izuku said and continued. "Like I said, there's no need to be like that. I come in peace." He held both his hands up beside him. Izuku was still skeptical, but Jiren kept speaking. "Ahem, I came with an offer. Vigilantes and low-level villains aren't too different. Both steal and do what they can to survive only to get chased down by the police. I'm just here to offer a helping hand, really." Izuku kind of felt like punching him. He was not similar to a villain. Jiren pulled a paper card from his back pocket and held it out, allowing Izuku to walk towards him. "Think about it?" Izuku walked forward with a raised eyebrow and took the card. Only one side had anything on it. Thread. One-stop shop. As villains vigilantes, the world may deny us things such as easy access to things like food, hygiene, or electricity. One-stop shop is a place where villains vigilantes, such as yourself, can use a plethora of resources for free, including everything listed previously. The only rule is that you play nice while you're in the facility. Is you have a problem with a fellow villain, then take it outside or deal with it on your own time. Below it listed direct coordinates instead of a block or building number. Izuku deadpanned at the informant. The word villain was scribbled out in Sharpie, and above it was the word vigilante instead. He could have at least made Izuku a custom card. "Right? I'll consider it. How did you find this place?" Shitty business cards aside, the most concerning thing was how the man knew where his home was. Jiren laughed casually. "I'm an information broker, kid. It's my job to know things I shouldn't." Izuku put the card in his utility belt. He wasn't gonna let this go. "No, I asked you how you knew, not why you knew. Did you follow me? Did someone else follow me?" He stalked closer to the villain. There was no reason Izuku shouldn't turn him in to the police. Jiren laughed nervously. Now, no need for that. If you must know, I have a friend who makes gadgets. I borrowed one of their drones to follow you on one of your patrols. Swear on my heart, I'm the only one who knows." He put a hand over his heart and closed one eye. Izuku was not gonna play this game. He'd read up on how information brokers worked. "But you'd sell that info in a heartbeat if someone paid the right price?" Jiren laughed in mock shock. "No, of course not. I have standards. I would never put you at risk. You have my word." A villain's word meant nothing to Izuku, but he didn't say that out loud. Instead, he just sighed. "All right, but if you don't leave in 5 minutes, I'm gonna punch you." Jiren bowed dramatically and walked towards the city. Izuku stayed and watched until the man's silhouette faded into the distance. When the broker was finally gone, Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Izuku walked to his room, now paranoid over whether or not someone knew where he was. Maybe he should invest in some home security. Shoyuta took a sip off his coffee as Tsukachi spoke about his current case. Over the last few weeks there's been a new vigilante running around the streets and Shoyuta was supposed to help catch them. He didn't know the police needed him specifically, but work was work so he obliged. So, that's 4 villains arrested today thanks to them. Same as before, restrained with restraint tape with minor injuries like bruises or scrapes. Shoyuta nodded, only half listening. And their name is? Folks online are calling them Jackrabbit, no known real name of course. Shoyuta hummed. He'd heard the name before on online spaces, people seemed excited by the new vigilant. Shoyuta didn't have anything against vigilantes, sometimes they were even helpful. But that was only if the vigilante knew what they were doing, was an adult, and didn't cause Shoyuta trouble. Even then, it was still an illegal use of a person's quirk and generally dangerous. Jackrabbit was likely a child, had no professional training, would definitely get in Shuta's way, and put themselves in increasingly dangerous situations. So he agreed to get the kid off the street, though they hadn't made much progress. The kids stuck to the same areas and times, but were tricky to pinpoint where they were at the exact right time. Shoyuta had just been instructed to go on his usual patrols and follow Jackrabbit if he spotted them. That was an issue for tomorrow Shoyuta though. Today he was just listening to Tsukachi list off what they knew. It's believed that Jackrabbit is a child, hopefully not true but it seems likely. No information or sighting of their quirk but they don't seem to have any physical manifestations of it, the rabbit ears are just part of their mask. So far they've only dealt with low-level villains, muggers, thieves, drag dealers and the like. Shoyuta nodded, sounded about right. Most vigilantes picked easy fights, which was for the best. Dangerous villains should be left to the pros. At the end of the day, pro heroes had support systems to fall back on while vigilantes almost always worked solo. They've only ever been spotted in Mizudafu, sticking to back alleys and the rougher parts of town. It should be easy to catch them with how much we know about their routine. Shoyuta hoped that was the case. It didn't sit right with him, there being a child fighting villains, no matter how good the kid was at it. He'd just have to wait and hope for the best. Izuku woke up late afternoon on May 11th, around 1 p.m. Last night had taken more out of him than he thought it did, not to mention Jiren appearing and making Izuku paranoid about his home. He got up and stretched, sighing in relief as some of his stiff joints popped. He sat on his mattress. His first order of business was tending to his eye wound. It had been clearing up nicely the last week, less raw-looking and not as sensitive. He still kept it wrapped just to be on the safe side. His right eye's vision hadn't gotten better with time and his right eyelid was still a tad lower than his left's. He was just glad he was able to see out of it at all. After rewrapping his eye he dug through his utility belt on the floor and pulled out Jiren's card. Maybe Izuku should check it out. He said that anyone would get to use anything in the facility for free but Izuku was rightfully skeptical about that. A food bank giving away food made sense, a random villain giving away food? Suspicious. Izuku set the card on a desk which was also stolen. Pretty much every piece of furniture in his room was and sat in a metal chair. His laptop was already set up on the desk. Izuku opened it tiredly. He'd do some more digging on Jiren before deciding whether or not he'd check out the villain's facility. Any new info would be added to the cork board hung above the desk. The usual info came up, a list of the villain's crimes which was mostly blackmail and extortion, along with info on the man's quirk. Izuku got out his notebook. He might as well add Jiren's quirk to his analysis. Everything considered, it was a calm start to his day. It was one of his days off from working out. Izuku had made lots of progress in that regard. And his patrols weren't until late at night, meaning he had the entire day free. He considered doing daylight patrols but decided against it. Heroes were more likely to spot him and he didn't need the trouble. He'd have to leave around midday to steal some food, which he hated doing. It was the reason he was considering Jiren's offer in the first place. Stealing was inconvenient and, more importantly, tainting his heroic record. He hummed as read through a few articles on Jiren. Izuku had a feeling today would be interesting somehow. It was hours later when Izuku saw the golden glow of the sun filter through his window that he realized how much time had passed. He'd added a lot of info on Jiren to his cork board, more than he expected. Izuku stood from the chair and stretched his, cursing himself for having such terrible posture. He checked the time, it was around 6 p.m. Izuku set his notebook and laptop aside to change into his vigilante costume. He had errands to run. It was after the sun had set when Izuku went out. He was in his vigilante outfit but wasn't starting his patrol just yet. He had a duffel bag full of extra clothes, a toothbrush and toothpaste, and dirty clothes as well. There were a few things he planned for his outing: sneaking into the public showers to, shower. Then a public laundromat for his clothes, then probably steal a pre-made meal from the local convenience store. All of which had to be done if there was no one else in the building, or if he snuck through back doors or vents. It was a little tedious, but it worked for him. It didn't take long for him to get through the first two errands. The shower had been refreshing and the duffel bag smelled of clean laundry. He was trying to dry his damp hair as he walked to the back door of the convenience store. He made sure his mask and respirator were on properly before picking the lock. Yet another villainous skill he learned on YouTube. Once in the back of the store, he grabbed a few pre-packaged sandwiches, simple ham and cheese ones, and left before the cashier knew he was there. He'd make his way back home, drop off the duffel bag and extra food, then start his patrol. He casually strolled through alleys and munched on his sandwich. He was starting to feel more and more at home in dark alleys. Now being in daylight was something he tried to avoid. He guessed that's just what happened when you became a vigilante. Living a normal life became difficult, trying to balance a vigilante and normal life even more so. Izuku finished his sandwich and wiped the crumbs from his gloves. It didn't concern him. He chose his life and he was enjoying it despite the struggles. He arrived at the warehouse and made his way to his room, dropping off the duffel bag full of clothes and food. He grabbed his notebook off the desk and stuffed it into his utility belt. He hadn't had much time for on-the-go analysis between taking down villains, but he still enjoyed having it on him. After doing a final check and making sure he had all his gear, he stepped out of his hideout to start his patrol. Shoyuta stepped out of the police station to start his patrol. His goal tonight was to try and encounter Jackrabbit. He was told to try and gain their trust, see if they could take the vigilante in peacefully. Shoyuta doubted that's how things would go, but he'd try. Shoyuta quickly made his way up a nearby building, the cool night air causing his scarf to flow wildly behind him. According to data gathered from Jackrabbit taking down villains, they seemed to do a large circle around Muzutafu and Target. Any villains or crimes they happened across. There wasn't enough info to pinpoint an exact route, so Shoyuta simply went in one direction and hoped for the best. He did laps around different blocks, taking down the occasional thug and reporting it to Tsukachi. The night was rather tranquil. Shoyuta wasn't even sure if Jackrabbit would be out on this day. He'd spend another few hours looking, and if Jackrabbit didn't show before then, he'd call it a day. On the other side of the city, Izuku had just taken down another villain, the fourth one this night. The villain had been attacking someone, maybe for money or maybe out of anger. Izuku ran to the victim and leaned down. They were unconscious but still breathing. Izuku checked their wounds carefully. There was no blood anywhere, but they did have a large bruise on their forehead. Izuku would stick around until he could hear police sirens. He got out his burner phone and reported the crime, keeping his eye on the tied-up villain. Izuku had made it a habit to tie their mouths up to stop the barrage of annoying insults and threats, but only if it wouldn't suffocate them. Once the crime was reported and the operator said police were on the way, he slid down the wall to sit beside the victim, who Izuku had carefully positioned on their back. It shouldn't be too long before police arrived. They'd started recognizing his voice over the phone and knew when it was him who called in a crime. Izuku was almost flattered, though he probably shouldn't be. The police knowing him meant they'd be paying more attention to him and his technically not illegal vigilantism. Not illegal but still not legal either. If vigilantes tended to exist in gray areas, then Izuku was completely monochromatic. Izuku really wished he could get a pro license. One little card saying he was a hero would fix all his problems, but again, he chose his life and he was enjoying it. When Izuku heard police sirens, he stood up and scaled the building. He knew the victim would be taken care of. Normally he'd head home around this time, around 1:09 a.m., but he wasn't tired, so he'd continue on for maybe another 30 minutes. He hopped from building to building, going the opposite direction of the villain he'd just defeated. It worked well to keep the cops and heroes off his tail. He was prowling around the alleys near the main city street when he heard someone clear their throat. Thinking it was a villain, he hopped backwards and lowered himself to the ground, ready to fight. When he didn't see anyone in his immediate line of sight, he turned to look in every direction, lastly, looking up. There on a building's ledge was the underground pro-hero Eraserhead. Izuku was split between feeling and fear because oh my god it's Eraserhead. And oh my god it's Eraserhead. Tonight was either going to be the best or worst night of his life depending on where the interaction went. Eraserhead jumped to the ground and stood a few feet in front of Izuku. Shoyuta actually found Jackrabbit. He wasn't expecting to, but he did. They looked just like the images Tsukachi got of them on surveillance cameras. Shoyuta put his hands in his pockets. He was just here to talk for now. Luckily, his little tactic worked as he saw Jackrabbit's shoulders relax a bit. Jackrabbit. He watched the kids straighten up and nervously fidget with their hands. Oh yes. Hi, Mr. Eraserhead. The kids I flicked around the alley. They were nervous but they didn't seem flighty. Shoyuta was upset at how young they sounded. He was expecting them to be around 16 or 17. They sounded, you know who I am? Why yes, of course. I know a lot about heroes. A hero fan? Shoyuta didn't think they sounded excited about it. They sounded more defeated. They could have been let down by heroes. Shoyuta nodded. Why don't we talk for a bit? Jackrabbit tilted their head and shrugged. Your name? Jackrabbit crossed their arms. Shoyuta expected that. Of course. The station knows you as Jackrabbit, is that all right? They nodded. Yeah, that's fine. I like the name. Then about your age, how old are you? They crossed their arms again. I won't give an exact age, but it's pretty clear I'm not an adult. Shoyuta hummed tiredly. Again, he wasn't expecting a lot of answers tonight. Then what's a young man like yourself doing fighting villains? He guessed their gender. He'd find out if he was right or not by their response. I'm just trying to save people. That's what every hero does, right? They're male then, he'd tell Tsukachi later. You are a vigilante, something very different from a hero. Jackrabbit huffed. Not that different. Why not try to get a hero license? If the kid was so eager to be a hero, then he just needed to go about it the proper way. I can't. Shoyuta sighed. Kids. Always being difficult. And why can't you? If it's about your quirk, I assure you a quirk can be useful when applied correctly. Jackrabbit didn't say anything, but he did look at his shoes, then to Shoyuta. Shoyuta dug through his head for what those red shoes meant. He knew he'd seen them before. It suddenly clicked. The problem child is quirkless. Shoyuta narrowed his eyes at Jackrabbit. A quirkless vigilante? Shoyuta knew people often claimed he was like a quirkless hero because of his fighting style, but that simply wasn't true. Shuta's quirk allowed him to level the playing field in most situations, essentially making it a fight between quirkless people as long as he continuously erased the other person's quirk. Even just that small difference made it easier for Shoyuta to be a hero. Someone who was actually quirkless wouldn't have such an advantage. They'd have no advantages. Shoyuta didn't believe it was impossible for a quirkless person to be a hero, but certainly not some untrained teenage kid on the streets. I don't believe this is a good idea, Jackrabbit. When you have no quirk to assist you in battle, you're putting yourself in an even more dangerous situation than it'd normally be. Shoyuta clearly said the wrong thing as Jackrabbit stiffened, their voice eerily quiet and monotone. Nothing like that excited yet nervous voice from before. Is that so? I see. I'll keep that in mind, Aizawa. I should get going though. Jackrabbit bowed and made his way up the building Shoyuta was previously on before disappearing from view. Shoyuta sighed deeply. He'd have to find a way to apologize sometime. He didn't want to discourage or invalidate Jackrabbit. He simply wanted the kid to be safe. Izuku hopped from building to building, his breath catching in his throat. It was embarrassing, but he felt tears welling in his eyes. He hopped down the building he was on and landed on the ground with a thump. He took off his mask and respirator to wipe the tears that had started falling. The warehouse was close by. He'd run the rest of the way. By the time he did get home, his eyes were puffing and the quiet tears turned to audible sobs. Izuku felt pathetic, crying just because one of the few heroes he still liked also denied him. It was ridiculous. He'd just have to throw out any Eraserhead clothes he happened to still have. He shoved his way into his room and dug through the basket of clothes he had, tossing anything even remotely Eraserhead related behind him. Izuku would show all the heroes how great he could be. It didn't matter if one more person said he couldn't, Izuku would persist anyway. Their opinions of him didn't matter, he'd decide what he did and how he did it. Izuku dropped the pile of Eraserhead merch out of his room, he'd throw it all out tomorrow. He was tempted to scratch out Eraserhead's page in his hero analysis book but decided not to. He could use that information against the hero. Izuku flopped down on his bed. The tears had finally stopped, but now he was exhausted. Izuku laid silently, just looking up at the ceiling. He needed to remind himself why he was doing this, why he wanted to be a hero, why he couldn't listen to anyone he said otherwise. He needed to remind himself to keep living. If he died, by his own hands or an enemy's, he'd be proving everyone who hurt him right. If nothing else, Izuku would live out of sheer spite. Izuku took a deep breath to calm himself. He could feel his eye and eyebrow twitch with irritation. He eyed the little paper card hanging off his desk. Right, the one-stop shop, he said he'd check out today. He'd go, even if it was almost 2 a.m., he needed a distraction and maybe an excuse to beat up villains if that's how it ended up going. He put back on his rabbit mask and respirator and grabbed the card to look up the coordinates. He left his hideout and typed the numbers into a map app and made his way over. Maybe he'd be able to eat some real food there, as insufferable as being surrounded by villains would be. Izuku stood outside the facility. It looked surprisingly high quality, not run down and sad looking like Izuku was expecting. It didn't have a drab atmosphere like he thought it would either. Instead, the vibe it gave off was weirdly warm and welcoming. Yellow light shone through the windows and Izuku could hear laughter from inside. He mentally prepared himself to walk in and wait as everyone stopped enjoying themselves solely because of his presence. He took a step but was cut short by the sound of Jiren's voice. "Jackrabbit." The man walked over with his arms out to the side. Welcome. I'm surprised you came so soon." Izuku didn't respond to the man, still mad he knew where the warehouse was. Jiren cleared his throat nervously. "Ahem, right. Still, I'm glad to see you here. Come on in." Jiren pushed the double doors and Jackrabbit followed closely behind, readjusting his mask and respirator to make sure his face was fully covered. The place was filled with people, either at tables, booths, bar stools, or just hanging around. The place was huge. Izuku had to turn his head to see from one side to the other. The floor was wood and the walls were covered in an autumn forest theme wallpaper. There were lots of tables, a mix of round and rectangular ones, all with 4 or more seats to each. Along the walls were booths with padded seats, and along a bar in the back were bar stools. What looked like waiters made their way through the cramped spaces between the tables, delivering food and drinks to the people sitting down. There were a lot of decorations too, from fake katanas plastered on the walls, to one of those weird talking fish things, to nets and hammocks strung up from the ceiling. There are even people in the nets and hammocks, some sleeping and some just relaxing. At the very back was a bar that spanned the entire room from one end to the other. Thousands of different drinks and glasses filled the shelves on the back wall. Izuku was awestruck. He would have thought this place was a 5-star underground bar run by rich people if he hadn't been explicitly told it was by villains for villains. Apparently villains love presentation more than anything. Izuku looked around wildly, trying to take everything in. Beside him, Jiren laughed proudly. "Ha, I know, right? I put a lot of work into this place. Even more work to keep it self-sufficient and away from the heroes." Izuku hated to admit it, but this place was really cool. He was still nervous though. Through the corner of his eye, he could see people looking at him only to turn away when he went to meet their gaze. There were also a few faces he recognized, having turned them into the police before. Izuku really hoped the villains here would respect the play nice rule as much he would. Jiren stepped forward and motioned Izuku to follow. Jiren held his head to the side so he could walk and look at Izuku at the same time. "Like I mentioned, this place has anything you need and all for free. Funded by tax fraud and money laundering, of course." Izuku's eye twitched. He'd just ignore the fact Jiren said that. As far as Izuku knew, this place was funded legally. "So, what did ya come here for?" Jiren turned to face him and leaned against the bar counter. Ah, just something to eat. Izuku was really starting to feel claustrophobic. Being literally surrounded by villains was freaking him out. He'd just eat and leave as soon as possible. Jiren spoke with the bartender for a bit before grabbing a menu and handing it to Izuku. Just tell Wendigo here what you'll want and she'll make it for ya. She's the best cook we have, I'm sure you'll love it. Izuku grabbed the menu and nodded, looking over the options. Oh, and don't worry about the villains here, they know not to start any fights in my place. Though, can't do anything about them starting fights outside, so be careful on your way out, yeah? Jiren gave a wink and took his leave, ducking into a staff-only door. Izuku sat on one of the bar stools and lazily looked over the menu. He was already tired and being here was not helping. Seeing that katsudon was on the menu, he ordered that. Wendigo took the menu back from him. She was a tall, muscular lady wearing a deer skull as a mask. Izuku thought the skull mask was a really cool idea but kept the compliment to himself. He'd avoid talking to anyone here for as long as he could. He waited idly, tapping his finger and messing with his mask's floppy ears as his food was being made. Wendigo didn't say how long it'd take, but he didn't want to leave and risk his food being thrown out or something. There was a lot of clanking in the kitchen. He could actually see what was going on if he looked in between all the glasses of wine and beer on the shelf. He was a little concerned when he saw fire rise from a stove, but the chef wasn't bothered. He looked over the sea of villains. Things were surprisingly peaceful. It was just people talking and enjoying themselves with friends. It was so normal. A kind of normal Izuku's always been chasing after. They looked less like villains the more he looked at them. Izuku laid his head on the bar counter. He wondered if he'd ever be able to achieve a normal life. He liked how he was doing currently, but if there was one thing he'd change, it was having friends. He and Kaken had a complicated relationship. Izuku would be lying if he said they were friends. He didn't have any friends in elementary school either, and becoming a vigilante made it difficult to meet new people since he was always keeping his identity a secret. These villains spoke with each other so freely, Izuku almost envied them. He wanted that kind of camaraderie too, but vigilantes weren't all that common. He didn't want to befriend villains, and heroes would try to arrest him. It's fine. He chose this life. If being a vigilante means he has to be alone, he'd accept that. He was brought out of his thoughts as a glass bowl clanked against the counter. He lifted his head up and pulled it closer to him. Oh, thank you very much. He looked up to see Wendigo again, leaning an elbow on the counter. Jackrabbit, huh? Izuku looked off to the side and nodded. Yes. Izuku internally begged her to stop talking to him. It didn't work. Jiren talks about you a lot. Good things, I hope? She pushed herself off the counter and made a gesture with her hands. You enjoy your food then, Cottontail? Cottontail? Izuku brushed aside the nickname, not entirely sure what she meant by it. He was hungry and tired. He'd eat then leave. He pulled his respirator down but kept his rabbit mask up. Luckily, it covered his freckles. It did show the bandages that still covered his right eye though. He'd just have to eat extra quickly. He scarfed down his katsudon, keeping his head low to try and prevent anyone from seeing his bandages. Most of the people who had looked at him when he first entered were now minding their own business, even the ones he previously got arrested. He did want to arrest them again, but again he was tired and didn't want to break the play nice rule. When he finished his katsudon, he quickly fit his respirator back on his face and double-checked his mask. When he was sure he was covered, he called over Wendigo again. What's the tale, Cottontail? Izuku didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. I'm just done with my food and wanted to know what to do with my dish. She held out her hand and he passed the bowl over. I'll take care of it for you. You leaving early then? It's 3 in the morning. Exactly. Come back again sometime, Loppy. The rabbit nicknames were getting out of control, but he wasn't going to say anything. She might get mad if he did. Right, bye. He scurried out of the one-stop shop right after she left his line of sight. No one followed him out either. He'll admit Jiren saying he couldn't stop fights outside had made him paranoid. He clawed up a building and hopped through buildings as usual to get home. Izuku fell backwards onto his mattress. He was so tired he might just fall asleep in his vigilante outfit. No, it was too uncomfortable. Trying to move as little as possible and refusing to leave his bed, He changed into some pajamas. His outfit, which was normally folded and placed on the desk, was thrown into a pile beside his bed. Today felt way longer than it should have been. It was time for Izuku to go to sleep. By the time Izuku woke up it was already 1 p.m. Izuku was twisted up like a pretzel in his blankets. He'd slept well, but too well apparently since he'd slept a total of 10 hours. He untangled himself out of his blankets and sat up sluggishly. No time to waste though. If he wanted to be able to get in a workout and stretching and a meal before his patrol, he'd have to start his day right this second. He stood and stretched. He had a few things he wanted to get through today. First up was learning more about Trigger since it seemed to be a big deal amongst villains. Izuku absently wondered if he could ask around One Stop Shop and see if anyone there knew anything before coming to the realization that the villains would just get mad at him, obviously. Izuku slumped into his desk chair and opened his laptop. After a bit of info digging, he'd eat one of the convenience store sandwiches he still had, do his routine workout, and see if he can steal some clothes from Imono's after trashing the Eraserhead merch he set outside his door. Despite waking up in the afternoon, Izuku felt like it'd be a productive day. Katsuki has been spiraling. Not something he liked to admit, but it was true. Another week went by with no sign of Izuku. Katsuki was all kinds of set off, confused, worried, and betrayed. He could admit that in his head, just not out loud. His therapist said it was progress. Katsuki called it annoying emotional bullshit that got in the way of everything. His quirk was still finicky. He'd been able to spark off access and damage things like inanimate targets, but only if there was no one else around. If there were people in his vicinity, his quirk just wouldn't. It just wouldn't. Katsuki had done enough thinking to know the reason why. He just didn't like the reason. Yes, he was being overly stubborn, but if he wasn't stubborn, wasn't angry, what else was left? Sadness, grief, guilt, jealousy? Katsuki didn't want to feel that shit. He was trying to double and triple down, it just hadn't been working as well this past week. So yeah, he was spiraling. His therapist and parents knew, of course they did. Katsuki could hide shit from his parents no matter how hard he tried. His teachers or the class extras in class though, they knew him as the same old Katsuki as always. He still had an ego to uphold after all. His therapist had recommended him to train at his local gym, one of the fireproof, single-person, lockable ones. He didn't like his therapist solely because of her occupation as his therapist and not because of her personally, but he decided to listen to her advice. He texted his mom he wouldn't be home for a few hours and made his way to the gym. It was only a few blocks away. As he walked, he checked his phone. He constantly did for any updates on Izuku, which of course there never were any. He was scrolling through some hero forums when he saw something interesting. A post about a new vigilante in Mizudafu. A green rabbit. It infuriatingly reminded him of Izuku. He knew it was ridiculous. The color green reminded him of Izuku. Any quirk analysis reminded him of Izuku. Red shoes reminded him of Izuku. Katsuki was sick of it. He shut his phone off and stuffed it in his pocket. He wasn't gonna read a stupid article about a stupid green rabbit villain. He shoved the door to the gym open with his shoulder. He was already set off, and if his quirk started being difficult again, he might just punch the first person who approaches him. He ignored the girl at the front desk and walked to one of the fireproof rooms. Inside were a few hung-up sandbags, blue foam mats, as well as some weights and training dummies standing around the room. He dropped his school bag by the floor and walked up to one of the sandbags. He let off a few sparks from his quirk. It was working well enough. He'd burn off some steam and work on quirk control for a few hours. That should help him with the mess going on in his head. Katsuki stayed much longer than he planned to, around 3 hours in total. He meant to stay for only 30 minutes or an hour. It didn't matter how long he stayed anyway. He didn't actually feel any better than before, only more tired. At least he'd be able to fall asleep at a reasonable time. He was sweating head to toe by the time he was done, and breathing hard too. He didn't cry at all while he trained either. Anyone who says otherwise is a liar. He wiped the sweat off of his brow and walked back to the door, scooping his bag off the floor. The gym's main room was bathed in a golden glow. Katsuki was ready to walk home to do his homework when some random guy grabbed his shoulder. Katsuki involuntarily recoiled at the touch. Oh, sorry. Right, should have asked first, huh? Katsuki turned to see some red-haired loser smiling like life was good. Katsuki scowled. The hell did this guy want? Hey, so you were training, right? Think we could spar? He looked so DMN happy just asking. It was pissing Katsuki off. Hell no. Katsuki left before Shitty Hair could say anything more. He wasn't going to be a part of whatever that was. He had shit to do, and it's not like he could use his quirk against another person anyway. The loser'll have to find someone else to be his sparring buddy. Katsuki sped-walked home, silently seething the whole time. Why the hell was that guy so happy? Why was he pissing Katsuki off? He knew why, but he refused to say it. He got to his house and stepped inside, and as soon as he did, his shoulders relaxed a little. The hag hadn't been as harsh as she was before Izuku disappeared. A part of Katsuki wanted to yell at her, fight back and say he didn't need her pity. Another part of him desperately craved that soft and gentle touch, the reassurance he'd be okay, that Izuku would be okay. He blinked a couple times. God, he was almost crying as often as Izuku now. It was goddamn pathetic. Apparently he spent too much time wallowing in self-pity in the doorway because his dad walked over to him. Welcome home, Katsuki. Everything okay? Katsuki growled under his breath. Between fighting back and accepting comfort, he'd made his choice. I'm fine. Without even taking his shoes off, Katsuki stormed to his room. The hag called after him to come back out for dinner soon. He dumped his school books on his desk and slumped into his chair. He was restless and exhausted at the same time. Not exactly a new thing, but annoying all the same. He laid his head on top of the books and sighed. Everything and nothing mattered, and his life was falling apart, and who cares? He buried his head in his arms. He probably just needed some sleep. Maybe he really should spar with that red-haired kid. Izuku had made lots of progress on finding out about Trigger. His cork board was filled with new names and sketches of villains he thought were heavily involved with Trigger. Izuku closed his laptop, put the sketch in his utility belt, and put on his vigilante outfit. He was starting his patrol early again, but with how many villains he was going to go after, it was for the best. He adjusted his leg braces and fixed his masks. He'd taken the bandage off his right eye so he could see through both eyes. The wound had healed enough for him to wear the mask and respirator without irritating it. His vision was blurry, but field of vision and depth perception seemed fine. His right eyelid stayed slightly lower than his left. Izuku sighed and accepted that the wound was pretty much fully healed, and that's how his eye was from now on. Unfortunate, but what's done is done. Izuku stuffed a small notebook in his utility belt. He had a list of names of villains connected to Trigger. He planned on trying to find them, question them, restrain them, and leave them for the police. He'd scratch out the names as he went down. Izuku left his hideout and stretched as he walked towards the city. Sure, what he was about to do would be more dangerous than his previous patrols, but he was almost excited. It was the same feeling he had on his first patrol, giddy and eager to fight despite his total lack of professional training. Izuku clawed his way up a building and looked over the city, the sun setting behind all the buildings. Izuku took a deep breath. He's got this. Izuku was currently stalking a villain, the fifth one on the list. He was following the woman from above, walking along the building's edge. The woman was supposedly a well-known Trigger dealer who was on her way to sell her current briefcase full of the drag. Izuku stayed low to the ground and kept his footsteps silent. She had walked beneath a particular light in the alley, the yellow lighting casting an ominous glow over her. Izuku made his way to the building she was leaning against to watch from above. People were always less likely to look up when doing anything shady. Izuku sat crisscross on the building above. He might as well get comfortable. He took out the notepad and went over what he knew about her. She was in her early 40s. Her quirk was a hypnosis quirk that needed the victim to look into her eyes for 5 seconds or more to take effect. She doesn't make Trigger, she only distributes it. In other words, she was low on the ladder. Izuku was trying to make his way to the source, but in order to get there he'd have to get information from villains easier to find. Izuku put his notepad away when an older man approached the woman. The man had a heteromorphic quirk. He had a multitude of shark features across his body. The man stood next to the woman and leaned against the building as well. Izuku was confused as to why they were acting all nonchalant and innocuous when, to their knowledge, no one else was around. Either way, they started speaking. You got it for me? The man spoke gruffly. You know it. Still want the entire briefcase? The man nodded silently. The woman continued. Full price, you know how much? The man grumbled but pulled out a few wads of cash and handed them to the woman without looking in her eyes. She took it and counted it, humming in satisfaction. Good. Here. She held the briefcase out and the man snatched it from her. Izuku hit the stop record button on his burner phone. He was glad he thought to record it. Now he had to figure out how to deal with the two. The woman had a mental quirk and from what Izuku could find, never fought physically. He'd prioritize the shark man then. Izuku put his phone in his utility belt and knelt down, getting ready to leap down. He pushed off the building and aimed to land on the shark man's back. He pushed off the man, causing him to faceplant into concrete and drop the briefcase. Izuku heard the woman gasp behind him but ignored her. He grabbed the briefcase and tossed it to the roof of the building. Izuku couldn't let any of the villains he was hunting down tonight inject themselves with trigger. If that did happen, Izuku wasn't sure he'd be able to handle them. Back to the fight. The woman seemed to have fled. Izuku's eye twitched. That was where he was supposed to get more info from. He'd try and find her later. The shark man had recovered and started barreling towards Izuku. He hopped up, jumping over the man. Izuku had to keep dodging. The man would occasionally ram into a wall but it didn't hurt him much. He was clearly durable. Izuku wasn't sure if he'd be able to actually hurt the villain at all. Izuku ducked when the man tried to charge him again. He had run into so many walls his head started bleeding. You should really stop running into walls. You're gonna give yourself a concussion. The man told Izuku to shut up. Fine then, Izuku would just play the dodge game as the man gave himself brain damage. It'd help Izuku if anything. The man had started swaying, he wouldn't be on his feet for long. Izuku may or may not have quickened the process by kicking the back of the guy's legs. The shark man fell to the floor, unconscious. Izuku made his way back up the building, grabbed the briefcase, and ran in the direction the woman had gone in. As he jumped between buildings, he pulled out his burner phone to report the shark man. He was sure the operator could tell he was on the move not only by his panting but also because Izuku mistimed a jump once. Either way, the police were on the way to where the shark guy was. Izuku had found where the woman had run off to and was currently chasing her. She was fast and kept making erratic turns to dodge and lose him. Every few minutes she'd look up to him and try to activate her quirk. Izuku just made sure to look to the side of her whenever she tried it. Eventually she ran down a dead end. Izuku hopped down in front of her, briefcase in hand. He kept his eyes on the ground to avoid her quirk. He dropped the briefcase to the ground and kicked it away with his foot. He should be able to retrain her quickly, then interrogate, then move on to the next villain on the list. Izuku had spent more time than he wanted to on the two villains. What the hell? What do you want? If you wanted some, you could have just bought it. Izuku ignored her instigations and ran forward. He kicked her in the side and while she was off balance he pulled out the restraint tape and tied her hands behind her back. She tried to wriggle out of them and shake Izuku off but that just made him wrap the tape around her entire torso. In her struggle she fell to her side. Izuku tried to catch her but when he did she bit him. Oh. Calm down, he rubbed his hand. His glove helped lessen the bite but it still hurt. Stay there. He pointed at the woman. She had a horrifying expression on her face and Izuku quickly turned away to grab the briefcase. He leaned down to it and opened it, making sure to look back at the woman every few seconds to make sure she didn't try anything. The briefcase was similar to the one he found before, the only difference is this one had more vials in it. Izuku held one of the vials in his paw and swished it around. He wondered what would happen if he took trigger. It was supposed to enhance someone's quirk and make low-level quirks stronger by affecting the person's quirk factor directly. Izuku didn't have a quirk factor, so what would it do to him? Nothing, probably. He placed the vial back in the briefcase. He'd be taking it with him. It could be useful as a bargaining chip in future interrogations. Speaking of, he needed to ask the woman questions. He walked over and sat in front of her, looking at her forehead instead of her eyes. Her quirk was very interesting but very bad for him. Okay, I have a few questions I need to ask. He placed the briefcase in his lap. I have nothing to say to you. She was staring directly into his eyes. He just had to make sure to not look back. Surely there's something you could say? Why are you selling Trigger? Don't you know what it does to people? And who did you get your supply from? She didn't respond. Izuku sighed. God damn it, nothing was working in his favor. I'll just call the police. That got the woman's attention. What? You're actually gonna turn me in? But I swore I saw you at Jiren's place. Izuku took out his burner phone and paused. Yeah, I was there, but I'm still a vigilante. You didn't know that? Izuku wasn't famous, but he'd taken down a number of villains, and he was sure villains would have gossiped about him. Why the hell is Jiren letting a vigilante in there? Trust me, I'll make everyone know damn well who you are. Izuku shrugged. He was already working under the assumption that villains knew who he was. Some lady tattling to all the other villains didn't mean a lot to Izuku. He returned his attention to his phone, finally calling the police to report the woman as well. Izuku wouldn't admit to this, but he'd also taken the wads of cash the shark man gave her, then ignored all the complaints she yelled at him. Izuku made his way up the dead end the woman ran into. He was said, she didn't give him any leads at all. With the briefcase full of Trigger in one hand and his notebook in the other, he went down the list of villains. There was another villain who could tell him where Trigger came from. Apparently he went by Obsidian. If he remembered correctly, their quirk allowed them to sharpen any part of their body to be as sharp as well, Obsidian. It'd be a difficult fight, but Izuku really wanted to progress on this investigation. He readjusted his grip on the briefcase and headed in a random direction. He'd find out Obsidian's location somehow, even if he had to pay Jiren for the information. After 30 minutes of fruitless searching, Izuku really did have to pay Jiren for the information. At least the money he stole from the woman's drag deal made up for it. Now he could focus on getting information on Obsidian. Izuku hastily made his way over buildings. Obsidian was close by, now it was just a matter of finding him. That didn't take long either. Izuku heard crashing sounds and went to investigate, thinking someone was in danger, but it was just Obsidian shredding apart a random trash can. The man had bright, white, buzz-cut hair, red piercing eyes, and teeth sharp enough to bite through metal. His clothes were all kinds of torn up, a side effect of his quirk no doubt. Izuku smiled under the respirator, found him. Izuku set the briefcase of Trigger on the building and jumped down to drop-kick the villain. He was able to land the hit, but Obsidian remained upright. He stood in the mess of shredded metal and turned to Izuku. Obsidian's quirk was already activated, the man's entire body being knife-sharp. He took a step towards Izuku with a hunched posture and a manic smile. Now what's this? Some little rabbit? Ah, how cute. The man's voice started off sickeningly sweet but quickly deepened. What are you here for, brat? I'm busy. He spat out. Izuku lowered himself to the floor and braced himself for a fight. I want to know where you get Trigger from. I'm doing an investigation of sorts. He wasn't sure how his voice was so steady, but he was thankful he wasn't a stuttering mess. Obsidian laughed. It was a deep, mocking kind of laugh. That's funny. You think I'd tell you? I know who you are, rabbit. Izuku figured that was the case, but it still made things more difficult. So, you won't answer my question? Izuku took a deep breath. Sure, the atmosphere felt more suffocating than any other time he fought a villain, but he'd probably still be fine. Obsidian laughed again. I'll answer you if you can actually defeat me. Let's make it a game. Izuku didn't agree to the terms, but it didn't matter. Obsidian started charging forward anyway. Izuku ducked and rolled out of the way, practically throwing himself into a wall. Obsidian was quick to course correct though. He spun on his heel and ran for Izuku again. Izuku tried to jump out of the way again, but Obsidian was quick. He turned around at just the right time to cut Izuku's leg mid-jump. The cut ran from his ankle to just below the knee. Izuku cursed internally. He'd gotten bruises and cuts before, but nothing like this. Obsidian didn't let up. He kept charging at Izuku time after time. More and more cuts littered Izuku's legs, tearing through his leg braces. Obsidian stopped charging and stalked forward, slashing sharpened hands at Izuku. He was eerily reminded of the first villain he'd fought. Izuku continuously backed up, but eventually his back hit a wall. He was panicking. Obsidian could sharpen any part of his body, every part of him was a weapon. Izuku always fought barehanded, but right now trying to land any kind of punch or kick would only cause him more pain and wounds. What was he supposed to do? Obsidian pressed his fingers together and aimed for Izuku's head. Izuku ducked in the nick of time, rolling out to the side and circling around the villain. Stay still, rabbit. Izuku kept his distance. He needed a weapon, any kind of weapon. He eyed the torn-apart garbage can. There were large pieces of sharpened metal strewn across the floor. Even if it wouldn't pierce Obsidian's body, he could use it for protection. Dodging another one of Obsidian's attacks, Izuku grabbed a large sheet and stuck it beneath his arm. Obsidian was still chasing Izuku, eventually catching the boy at a dead end. Izuku kept his back to the wall and his eyes of Obsidian. He needed a way out or something. Izuku really didn't know what to do. The villains he always fought had unhelpful or easy-to-counter quirks, no professional training and no fighting experience. Obsidian looked like he was made to fight. Izuku remembered some other villains saying he was in professional boxing at one point. None of that mattered here. What mattered was his survival. Obsidian stalked closer, slowly. It was clear he was enjoying Izuku's fear. It really was a game to him. Obsidian suddenly leaped forward, jumping several feet in the air and aiming his sharpened fingers right at Izuku's neck. He fumbled for the piece of metal under his arm and stuck it between his face and Obsidian's claws. It worked. There was a grating scratching sound as Obsidian's claws dug through the metal. Obsidian laughed. Izuku was downright horrified at this point. What the hell was even happening? Clever rabbit. I'm getting bored though. Obsidian pulled his hand back, taking the sheet of metal and Izuku with it. He was flung from one alley to another, rolling across the ground before his head hit concrete. Izuku scrambled to his feet as Obsidian approached, but he wasn't fast enough. Obsidian stabbed his fingers through Izuku's shoulder and lifted the boy up. Izuku couldn't bite down the yell of pain as he tried to squirm out the villain's grip. All the moving simply made the sharpened ends dig deeper into him, blood dripping down his costume. Isn't this fun? Izuku tried to reach his hand up to the wound, to pry it off or get Obsidian off or anything. Nothing worked. Obsidian angled his fingers down, causing Izuku's body to fall to the ground, like a piece of meat sliding off the hook it was hung on. Izuku's head hit concrete for the second time. He tried to push himself up, but the pain in his shoulder was too much. Obsidian leaned down and glared at Izuku. Ah, better luck next time, right? You shouldn't bite off more than you can chew. Izuku's vision was shaky, but he could clearly see Obsidian raise his hand. Izuku was sure he would die. It certainly felt like it. 3 sharp fingers slashed his left side, digging far deeper into his body than his shoulder wound did. Immediately, blood pooled around him, tainting the trash scattered around the two. Obsidian laughed one last time before turning away. Have fun bleeding out. I'll be back for rabbit stew later. Izuku squirmed and shifted in the dark uselessly. He was trying to move, crawl, shuffle, drag himself, but it was no use. Izuku tried to calm his thoughts. His mind was so frantic and erratic, he had a headache. He needed to take care of his wounds. He tried to recall the first aid he knew. Right out pressure on the wound. The problem was both wounds were on his left side. He focused on the more lethal wound. The 3 slashes. He wrapped his hands around his side, wincing as he had to move his injured shoulder. If he could just get the bleeding to stop. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out some bandages. He just needed to stop the bleeding. He could figure everything else out after. He wrapped the bandages around his side loosely before grabbing the end and tightening it as much as he could. He groaned at the sudden pressure and pain that came from it, but he knew it was for the best. Next was his shoulder. He did the same, wrap it loosely then pull it tighter. With both major wounds wrapped, his arms fell beside him weakly. Izuku shifted to lay on his back, looking up at the night sky above him. He was gonna die here. He was gone prove the world right. He couldn't be a hero. It was too dangerous for him. He should have never tried. Izuku closed his eyes. He missed his mom. Izuku opened his eyes to see the night sky. That didn't seem right. Wasn't he dead? Izuku slowly turned his head to the side. Same alley. Okay, so he wasn't dead. Izuku didn't want to move, didn't want to get up or even think. But he had to. He remembered Obsidian saying he'd come back and Izuku was not going to stick around for that. So despite the immense amount of pain it brought, Izuku sat upright, his face scrunched in pain the entire time. Izuku needed a plan. He would try to sew up his wounds? That sounded good. He shouldn't walk around with open wounds. He positioned himself against the wall and slowly and painfully took off the top part of his vigilante costume. He could get a good look at the wounds now. The ones on his side were deep and utterly flooded with blood. Izuku had no idea how he was still alive or if his living status would last the rest of the day. His shoulder wound wasn't as bad, but still awful to look at. Bloody, raw, and blood gushing out. Izuku numbly got out a needle and thread. He didn't think he'd ever have to actually use it, but here we are. It was difficult, with the wounds being in rather hard to see or hard to reach places, and with Izuku having never sewn anything before, but he made it work. It was shabby and quite literally tearing at the seams, but his wounds were stitched. He even got to the one that spanned his lower leg, just to make walking a little easier. He wrapped his poorly stitched wounds in bandages, and all the other smaller wounds he missed while bleeding out, and put his shirt back on. He had an idea of where to go. He wasn't sure if they'd actually help, but he didn't know anyone or anywhere else that'd help. Izuku used the wall to help himself to his feet. From there it was just a matter of limping all the way to the one-stop shop at 4 in the morning. Izuku made it, he actually did. He stood in front of Jiren's place, a bloody, barely standing mess. It was quiet, so quiet that Izuku assumed it was closed. Whether or not it was closed didn't matter to Izuku's delirious mind though, so he walked in anyway. He made his way past the empty tables and to the bar. He looked around but Wendigo wasn't there. He didn't know what else to do, so he sat on one of the stools and laid his bloodied head down. A few minutes of delirium-filled thoughts and daydreams later, he felt someone tap his shoulder. He looked up to see Wendigo. "Jackrabbit?" Izuku sluggishly lifted his head. "Wendigo!" She made her way out from behind the bar and walked over to him. "Yes." Izuku tapped her skull mask with his finger. "I like your mask." He laughed, a bit deliriously. "Everything okay, Jackrabbit?" Izuku planted his face into the counter. "Doctor." "Okay." Being careful of his bloodied injuries, Wendigo picked Izuku up bridal style and brought him through the staff-only door. Izuku was only partially conscious. He could hear Wendigo and Jiren's voices but didn't understand whatever they were saying. It didn't matter, Izuku was tired, he'd just go to sleep. The last thing he felt was his bare back on a cold metal surface. Too tired to care, Izuku just fell asleep. Hisashi didn't know why he was up at 5 in the morning. He was a morning person sure, but the sun wasn't even up yet. Maybe it was the random anxiety he'd felt lately. There's been a very specific issue that's been bothering him, something he and Shoyuta both worried about constantly. It was Jackrabbit. Hisashi knew him before he was a vigilante, when he was just some nervous kid with a rabbit mask asking for food. When he'd come in 2, maybe 3 times a day to fidget nervously as Hisashi prepared his food. He was worried sick over the kid. Since the first report Jackrabbit made, he didn't show up at the food bank at all. He spent days thinking the kid had gotten hurt or killed, but then Shoyuta spoke about picking up the case. He was still worried, maybe even more so, but at least he knew the kid was alive now. At least the kid was safe. Izuku blinked blearily. He had no idea where he was, but his entire body hurt all over. The room he was in was blindingly white. It took a while for his eyes to adjust. When they did, he eyed his surroundings. It was a hospital or clinic of sorts. He replayed yesterday's memories, right, all of his stab wounds. He couldn't remember how he got here though. Did someone find him? Did he crawl to find help? He guessed it didn't matter much. He could feel his mask and respirators still on his face. He reached up to take it off, but someone he hadn't noticed was there until just this moment spoke up. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Of course, I wouldn't share your identity with anyone else, but it's best to be careful, no." Izuku let his hands fall to his side as he turned his head. Beside the hospital bed he was lying on was a tall man with long brown hair and large circle glasses. The man's eyes were swirled, and for a moment Izuku thought he was seeing things when he realized it was likely just the man's quirk. Izuku tried to sit up, but the pain in his side prevented him. "Yes, it's only been 13 hours since you sustained your wounds, so movement is still very much restricted. Would you allow me to help you up?" The man hadn't done anything wrong, but something about him freaked Izuku out, so he shook his head. Very well, but I must ask that you stay as still as possible. We wouldn't want you tearing your stitches. Izuku nodded weakly. What the hell was even happening? Who was this? Forgive me. I've yet to introduce myself. You may call me Clockwork. I won't be sharing my real name, of course. You are Jackrabbit, yes? Izuku nodded again. It's a pleasure to meet you then. I'll be the one taking care of your wounds for now. Though do know, I have no control over you. While I recommend you stay bedridden for a few weeks at least, if you choose to leave, I can't stop you. Izuku hummed. He was glad he wasn't trapped here against his will. He still didn't know where here was. Where am I? His voice was rough and scratchy. He wished he had some water. You are a Gyrans. I am his only employed medical staff. I treat anyone who needs it regardless of villain or vigilante status. Knowing he was at the one-stop shop actually made him feel better. At least he wasn't in an actual hospital or a stranger's house. Clockwork leaned down and pulled a plastic water bottle from a bag. Water. Izuku still felt uneasy around the doctor, but nodded. Clockwork helped him sit up on the hospital bed and handed Izuku the water. He pulled down the respirator but kept the rabbit mask up and drank the water. He nearly chugged it but left about a quarter of water still in the bottle. He looked down at himself. The only remaining part of his vigilante outfit was his pants. His shirt, gloves, utility belt, leg braces, and arm wraps were all placed on the nightstand beside him. It made sense. His wounds were focused around his torso and legs. Clockwork said he could leave whenever, but could he? His lower legs were covered in cuts, a few of them pretty deep too. Izuku sighed. He wanted the pain to go away and to go home. He eyed Clockwork again. The man gave off an unsettling vibe and Izuku couldn't pinpoint why. Unfortunately, it seemed he noticed Izuku's hesitance. I see I'm frightening you. I apologize, it seems to be part of my quirk. People have told me that closing my eyes helps. Would you like me to do that? Izuku shrugged. Sure? And see, could you get Jiren? Clockwork closed his eyes and nodded. Despite not being able to see, he was able to leave the room without issue. Izuku sighed, taking in the silence. He finally had some time to think. He looked down and gingerly touched the stitches, wincing as he did. It was 3 slash marks, starting just under his last rib and ending above his pelvis. It went from his front side and wrapped around to the edge of his back. He moved onto the stab wounds through his shoulder, for little holes that were stitched up. It went completely through him, front of his shoulder and all the way through his muscle to his back. He couldn't even lift his arm up an inch without burning pains spreading across his entire left side. On his right leg, there was a line of stitches from his ankle to just below his knee. Izuku tested putting pressure on it by pressing his foot on the floor. Predictably, it hurt like hell. Izuku was feeling dread. Not even a month into his vigilante work and this happens? He'd undoubtedly have scars, but what if the damage was bad enough to affect him permanently? Could he still be a vigilante? The answer to that was easy. He'd still save people no matter what, even if he had scars all over his body or 1,000 broken bones. He'd help anyone he could. Izuku leaned against the back of the bed again. Sitting up put too much pressure on his side. He didn't want to stay in this underground illegal clinic any longer than he had to, but with his injuries he might have to. He flinched involuntarily when he heard the door open. He looked over to see Clockwork and Jiren enter. Hey kid, how was almost dying? The man stood with his arms in his pockets by the hospital bed. Izuku glared and didn't dignify the question with an answer. Jiren laughed off the silence. Right, too soon. Anyway, I see you've met Clockwork. He wrapped an arm around the supposed doctor. He's a bit of a freak show, but he's saved a ton of lives. You're in good hands, I can promise you that. Izuku slowly nodded. Clockwork's eyes were still closed and he had to admit, it did make the doctor feel less scary. Jiren shifted to see at the end of Izuku's hospital bed. Clockwork stayed standing still, eyes closed and arms behind his back. What a strange individual. You're probably gonna be here a while. You should at least stick around until you're well enough to walk, right? I mean, come on, top-tier medical care dash. Clockwork seemed to beam at that. 3 well-cooked meals a day, unlimited Wi-Fi, And you get to watch as many bar fights as you want. They're pre-scheduled, don't worry. Izuku was confused and tired. Why can't people just make sense? Jiren got out his phone and began tapping away at it. Izuku noticed the case had little bunny ears on it and thought it was cute, if odd. Suddenly, Clockwork walked over to a desk along the wall and gathered up some papers. He walked up to Izuku and handed the papers over, his eyes still closed. More information on your injuries and the suggested treatments. Of course, if you stay here I'll be the one taking care of everything medically, but if you do choose to leave when you can then please listen to the instructions I've written for you. Izuku took the papers in his hands. It was a few packets, all stapled together. Each page detailed a few of his injuries and how he should avoid making them worse and things to do to quicken his healing. Izuku was too tired to actually take in any of the information, but he nodded anyway. So about those well-cooked meals? Jiren pulled his gaze away from his phone. Alright, I'll have Wendigo make it for you. She said that you got Katsudon last time, want that again? Yes please. Jiren nodded and stood off the bed, cracking his spine as he stretched. Jiren took his leave and shortly after, Clockwork followed. He told Izuku to call him if he needed anything, then handed Izuku a piece of paper with his phone number on it. Izuku sighed. He wasn't enjoying the consequences of his actions. Since he'd have to stay in bed, he might as well go back to the drawing board. Izuku now knew he was wholly unprepared when he went looking for Obsidian. As distressing as it was, he replayed the fight in his mind. Obsidian was stronger, faster, reacted quicker, had a quirk. Maybe he was just fated to lose the fight. He pushed those thoughts away. He couldn't let himself spiral. He failed, but he'd improve. Right? So he'd need to continue training after he was healed. He should try to find real support gear too, maybe learn to use weapons? The only thing he was sure of was that something needed to change if he wanted to avoid dying. He was broken out of thoughts by the sound of the door opening. Thankfully he didn't flinch this time. Clockwork walked forward and pulled a tray from beneath the hospital bed and set it up so Izuku wouldn't have to hold the bowl with his hands. Clockwork placed the food and chopsticks on the tray. Here you are. I will be right outside in my office. Do let me know if you need anything. Izuku thanked him as he left. He had a lot to think about as he ate. He needed to change the way he fought if he wanted to take down more dangerous villains. He made a new mental checklist. Focus on recovering, after that focus on working out and his body, then find some way to learn actual fighting basics, lastly invest in support gear or weapons. He'd be more prepared next time, he'd be stronger. He should make sure he doesn't die first though. It was 11 a.m. and Katsuki was skipping school. It wasn't unusual for him, he still kept his grades up and the teachers never reported if he was tardy or absent anyway. He just didn't want to be around all those DMN extras. Instead, he was making his way to the gym again. There were still 9 months until the UD entrance exam, but if Katsuki wanted to actually have a chance, then he'd need to get his quirk back to how it was before. His therapist said if that's what he wanted to do, then he'd need someone to spar with, to get over the quirk not working when he tries to use it against someone thing. He flexed his hand as he walked, watching sparks dance across his palms. Like hell he'd let stupid feelings prevent him from being a hero. He pushed the door to the gym open and made his way inside. He made his way to the locker room and showers first. He didn't want to train in his middle school uniform, so he'd made sure to bring gym clothes. The changing room was empty too. It was almost eerie. Maybe it was just too early for most people. He put on a simple black tank top and gym shorts and entered the same fireproof gym room as before. He dropped his bag by the door and cracked his knuckles. He'd keep at it till the DMN sun set if it meant he could get his quirk under control. It was hours later, when school ended, that the red-haired kid from before appeared again. He peeked into the room Katsuki was in and lit up when he saw the blonde. Yo! Katsuki stopped sparking his palm as the redhead ran up to him. Katsuki was instantly irritated. Good to see you here again. Hey, I realized we never introduced ourselves. I'm Ejiro Kirishima. He pointed a thumb at himself and smiled brightly. Katsuki rolled his eyes but responded anyway. Katsuki Bakugo. Alright. Nice to meet ya, Bakugo. Katsuki just nodded, again. So, training again? Can I join? Kirishima had an expectant smile on his face. Katsuki's eyebrow twitched in irritation but shrugged. He didn't care as long as the other boy minded his own business. Alright, nice. Katsuki returned to his own training, practicing outputting his quirk at different levels while Kirishima moved to one of the sandbags beside Katsuki. The two boys trained in silence for only 25 minutes before Kirishima started talking again. So what are you training for? I'm trying to get into U.A. I know my quirk isn't really that flashy, but it's really good for offense and defense. Oh, right, my quirk's called hardening. I can harden any part of my body, which makes it kinda rock-like. He hit his sandbags a few more times, his quirk active. Katsuki hummed, just to show he heard. I'm getting into U.A too. Kirishima stopped hitting his sandbag to smile at Katsuki. Whoa, really? That's amazing. Even more reason to train together, right? I don't really have any training partners right now. He returned to punching the sandbag. Katsuki's quirk flickered at just the implication of sparring. He'd be fine doing quirkless spars for now though. It wasn't an entirely bad idea. We can do quirkless spars? He raised an eyebrow at the other boy, who immediately lit up. Hell yeah. Fine by me. He abandoned the sandbag he was at to run to one of the foam blue sparring mats. Katsuki huffed but walked over as well, clenching and unclenching his fists in preparation. Maybe it'd be nice to spar again. The two boys stood opposite of each other, both in a fighting stance. Katsuki, ever impatient, started forward to get the first hit in. Kirishima brought his arms up to block Katsuki's hit and stepped to the side. The two spun around each other, each one getting hits, blocks, and dodges in. The only sounds in the gyms were the sound of shoes squeaking against the foam mat and their ragged breaths as they fought. They weren't professionals by any means, but they were still competent fighters. The fight ended when Katsuki kicked Kirishima's leg and pinned the other boy to the mat. Ah, what? Katsuki stood and cracked his knuckles proudly. You never stood a chance, shitty hair. Kirishima got to his feet, stretching his arms. My name is Kirishima. Let's go again. Katsuki nodded and the two got back on the mat. They continued spar after spar. Both boys had a few wins and few losses, though Katsuki was in the lead with more wins than losses. As the sun started setting and a golden glow poured in through the gym's window, the two agreed to take a break. Breathing deeply after all the non-stop sparring, Katsuki grabbed a plastic water bottle from his school bag. Katsuki saw Kirishima didn't have a water bottle of his own, idiot. Katsuki grabbed a second and tossed it to the redhead. Kirishima fumbled with the water bottle for a few seconds before finally grabbing it. Oh, thanks man, super manly of you to share. Manly? Whatever. Katsuki sat on a bench beside Kirishima and chugged his water. When Kirishima was done with his own, he sat beside Katsuki. Man, you're a really good fighter. I could barely get any hits in. Katsuki couldn't hold back the prideful smile that spread across his face. Hell yeah, I am. UA only accepts the best. Kirishima nodded. There were a few minutes of semi-awkward silence before he spoke again. Hey, can I ask a question? It might be, sensitive. Katsuki scoffed. He doubted whatever the boy was gonna ask would bother him. How come you don't use your quirk? I mean, I've seen it before. Sparks, right? But every time I see your quirk it kinda fizzles away. Why you don't have to answer if you don't want to. He rubbed his neck sheepishly and looked away from Katsuki. Katsuki's jaw clenched involuntarily and he had to focus to avoid crushing his water bottle. Katsuki scowled as his legs started bouncing anxiously. Who the hell just asks that? Katsuki was ready to deck the extra across the face and never enter the gym again. None your effing business, is it? He glared at the other. Kirishima looked at Katsuki and nodded. Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't worry about that. Unsurprisingly, Kirishima apologizing just set Katsuki off more. He was going to stay silent, but it seemed his therapist's personality was rubbing off on him because he felt the urge to talk instead of ignoring everything. My quirk is called Explosion. My sweat has nitroglycerin-like properties and my palms can ignite it. The answer to why it's being difficult is the same as before, none of your goddamn business. Instead of being put off by Katsuki's attitude, Kirishima smiled. That's an amazing quirk. I'm sure you'll be a great hero. Katsuki's stomach lurched. He's pretty sure Izuku's said those exact same words before, same hopeful eyes and wide smile. Katsuki managed to scowl even more. Kirishima was eerily similar to Izuku in lots of ways. It was grating. The sickening optimism, the bright smile, the unwavering determination. Katsuki's breath hitched in his throat. He couldn't be here anymore. He stood up a little too quickly for it to be normal. I'm leaving. He walked to the door, grabbed his bag and left, ignoring the confused and hurt look on Kirishima's face. Katsuki sulked home, texting the hag that he'd be there soon. He'd have to avoid Kirishima for his own sanity. He just couldn't look at the other boy without being reminded of Izuku. He hated the constant reminders, but also couldn't let himself forget either. He huffed. He hated emotional contradiction. Why couldn't his head just make sense? He pushed his way into his house. I'm back. He kicked off his shoes and walked into the living area. His mom was on the couch, working on something on her laptop. His dad was in the kitchen, and it seemed like he was making nikujiga. Welcome home, brat. The hag didn't even look up from the laptop. Aha. He walked through the living room towards his own room, feeling the gaze of his parents as he went. He ignored them, parents and their weird but sixth sense to sense when something's wrong. He sat at his desk again and got his workbooks out. He was ready for the day to be over. He'd try to avoid shitty hair for as long as possible, but judging from the boy's personality it wouldn't last long. Katsuki sighed, his face squished against the palm of his hand. He couldn't help but begin to stare out the window. Just like he always had. God damn it, Izuku. Where are you? Izuku was feeling much better. Clockwork had given him some pain medication which really helped with the agony he was feeling before. He'd been given clean clothes to wear, simple light blue t-shirt and pants while his vigilante costume was being washed. Clockwork even said he could sew it up for him. The doctor was still weird. He said it was an effect of his quirk. His quirk allowed him to see the specifics of a person's physical and mental well-being. It wasn't a surprise he worked in the medical field. Izuku thought the quirk was interesting for sure. He even made a page for Clockwork in his quirk analysis journal. Maybe the weird feeling he got was because the quirk technically looked into the person's mind? Sometimes people have a sixth sense for danger. Maybe the nature of Clockwork's quirk sets off that sixth sense? Enough about Clockwork though. Izuku had all of his gear back minus the briefcase of trigger which Jiren confiscated, so it was back to planning in his journal. For the last few hours he'd been going over what kind of support gears and weapons would help him the most. For support gear, Izuku thought about things like retractable rope or a grappling hook of sorts, smoke bombs or other chemical-based gear, better restraining gear, maybe something to help with his vision as well. There were so many different directions he could go in. For weapons, Izuku thought about something long-range, but a bow or crossbow would be a hassle to carry around considering he was more of a quick-paced close combat kind of person. Knives or daggers could work. He'd be able to use them in tandem with his kicking style nicely. Maybe something electrified as a backup? He definitely wanted a way to incapacitate villains more easily. But then there was a rather glaring dilemma. Was it bad to rely on so much support gear? Most heroes had very few items to assist them, most only fought with their quirks. Izuku didn't have one. Maybe Eraserhead was right. Was it really just too dangerous? Even if he does gear up, if he were to lose that gear he'd be in the same position as when he fought Obsidian. Helpless and at the mercy of a villain, it was a twisted slide of luck that Obsidian was crazy and weird enough to leave Izuku bleeding out. Izuku sighed. So many problems and so few solutions. It wasn't the first and it wouldn't be the last time Izuku remembered that he wouldn't have any of these issues if he just had a quirk. He let himself fall back into the cushions of the hospital bed. All his problems would be solved if he had a quirk, but he doesn't and he can't change that. He has to find his own way of doing things. He looked down at his notebook of ideas. He had nothing to lose. He'd go through with the support gear and weapons and see how it went. Clockwork said Izuku could leave as soon as his leg was not mere moments away from falling apart, which happened to be a week. After that he could use crutches to make it home. All right. He has a week to brainstorm and learn how to make blueprints and weld and find out how to use knives and make chemical weapons. He'd figure it out. Shoyuda was not having a very good day. But Night, a large pool of blood was found in an alley. There were drag marks, but it looked like the victim moved themselves instead of being dragged by the criminal. Either way, it didn't look good, made even worse by the fact Tsukachi theorized the blood was Jackrabbit's. Earlier that day, Jackrabbit reported a trigger drag trade. The area the blood was found was also known for trigger dealings. Specifically by a villain named Obsidian, who'd been slipping under the hero's radar recently. Shoyuta pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew Jackrabbit would get himself hurt at some point, but Shoyuta wasn't expecting it to be this bad. There was so much blood. He wasn't even sure if the kid was alive. If he was, it'd have taken some serious medical attention. Tsukachi and him had gone from hospital to hospital, seeing if any patient with stab wounds and green hair was admitted. Nothing from the blood they found either. They had no evidence, no lead to chase, no area to search. Shoyuta would continue his patrols, but he had a feeling he wouldn't be seeing Jackrabbit for a long time. If the kid was alive, wounds like that would take time to heal. Shoyuta stood in the police lounge, waiting for coffee to fill his cup. He dreaded after telling Hisashi that the kid was injured and missing. He sighed again. Sometimes he loved his job, but it was times like these that made him remember why he hated it too. Izuku was glad to be home. It was May 20th, a week after his run-in with Obsidian. Clockwork hadn't technically cleared him, but Izuku just took advantage of the you can leave whenever rule, stole a crutch, and left. It took him an embarrassingly long time to get home, but he was finally here. He limped his way to his room, then proceeded to drop everything he was carrying, which was his vigilante costume, gear, and the briefcase of trigger that Jiren had actually returned. Jiren had stated, I do want it for myself, but I'm not the one who stole it, found it, or whatever. All yours, kid. Then threw the briefcase at him. If he wasn't physically and mentally exhausted, he'd get to researching right away, but yesterday Jiren made him watch 7 different back-to-back bar fights until it was 3 a.m., so Izuku was tired. Falling asleep at 9 a.m. seemed to be his new norm anyway. He carefully laid himself on his bed. While his foot was okay enough to limp on, his side and shoulders still pained him every day. He took off his masks and laid his head on his pillow. He was still in the light blue hospital-esque outfit Clockwork gave him despite his costume being repaired. It didn't take long for Izuku to fall unconscious. He hoped he slept longer than usual. He needed the extra energy for the next few days. When Izuku woke up, it was dark out. Not unusual for him in the slightest. He untangled himself from his blankets and stood up. He might as well sneak into the public showers since it was nighttime. He grabbed some casual clothes, a black shirt with a rabbit shadow puppet on it, and some baggy gray sweatpants. He made sure to grab boxers and a towel as well before slipping his sling and rabbit mask on. He stuffed his spare clothes and towel into a duffel bag and slung it over his good shoulder and grabbed his crutch. Would it be stupid, reckless, and dangerous for him to try and break into places with still healing wounds? Yeah. But he hadn't had a shower in a few days and felt filthy, so he was gonna do it anyway. Luckily he'd had time to practice with the crutch before he left the one-stop shop, so it wasn't like he was falling or anything. The public showers were on the edge of town anyway. He'd be fine. He made his way over, surprisingly quietly. He took his usual way in, lock-picking the back door. It was late enough that the employees were out, but the water was hooked up 24/7, so he didn't have to worry. He chose a random empty shower and leaned his crutch against the wall. He'd take a quick shower, sure what he was doing was technically already illegal, but he didn't want to ramp up the place's water bill too much. It'd be impolite. He's careful washing around his many wounds. Painful but necessary. When he's done, he pats himself down with the towel, balancing halfway on one leg. Izuku has never been in so much pain in his life. Even injuries Kaken caused weren't this bad, aside from his face, but that was an accident. He slipped the comfortable clothes on and sighed in relaxation. The shower made him feel much better, like things were better than they actually were. He slung the duffel bag back over his shoulder, shuffled to his crutch. He made his way out through the back door again and limped home, sticking to unpopulated alleys and back routes. He made it back to the warehouse. It hadn't been more than 30 minutes. He stopped in front of his room. The bag of Eraserhead merch he meant to throw out was still there. Izuku shrugged. He'd throw it out later, probably. Back in the familiarity of his room, Izuku sat at his desk. Even with the constant pain he was in, he had important things to do. He was completely helpless against Obsidian. He'd have to work on his everything if he wanted to last as a vigilante. Izuku had lots of plans he had to get started on. From upgrading his base costume to making more support gear to hopefully figuring out how to use weapons. He was excited for the end result, but dreaded the process. He'd have to learn how to invent things, and he could already imagine all the explosions. He might as well get a head start. He flicked open his laptop. He remembers watching a pink-haired girl work on inventions when he first arrived at the warehouse. Sure, everything she made blew up at some point, but she said it was a learning experience, and Izuku had to agree. He'd rather what he was inventing blow up while he was still working on it than say it's complete and watch as it explodes out on the field. He didn't have the energy to actually start working, but he could start learning the basics. He yawned, somehow tired even after sleeping all morning. It'd be a long night, but he was excited for it. Izuku had promised himself he'd only watch some videos to learn the basic skills and wouldn't be actually working with any gear. He lied. He had moved himself and his laptop into the wider warehouse area and gathered the plethora of unused and abandoned support gear he wasn't using. He'd found plenty of tools in a storage closet and was taking apart a random grappling device he'd found while listening to one of the pink-haired girls, May, as he found out videos. The thing she was working on had already exploded twice while Izuku barely managed to get a panel off his project. Still, even if he was just unscrewing things and taking out all the parts, it was really fun. Plus, it wasn't too taxing on his wounds, since his side and torso wounds were on his left side and he was using his right hand. It was oddly comforting, sitting in his warehouse and just tinkering away. This was his home, he could say that confidently by now. Still, as he thought that, he couldn't help but think of his mother. She really was amazing. It's not like she's gone. If anything, he's the one who's gone. He knows she misses him. He'd be delusional to think she's just moved on, even if he hoped she would. As he laid out the parts of the grappling device out, he let himself get lost in thought. Thinking of his mom always led him to the other most important person in his life, Kaken. He still didn't completely like the explosive boy, but Izuku would always hope for him. Hope he became a better person, hope he became a hero, hope things turned out well for him. Maybe Izuku was just messed up in the head, rooting for someone who'd been so cruel to him, but he truly believed Kaken could be a great hero. It was just that attitude of his. He wondered how Kaken was. Was he the same brash, stubborn boy as before? Or had Izuku's disappearance changed something? Izuku couldn't say for sure. Izuku and Katsuki knew each other better than anyone else in the world, and yet they also knew nothing about each other. It was an odd relationship. He was pulled from his thoughts as the device in his hand began whirring, parts of the rope in the device getting caught and tangled within itself. Before Izuku could get it to stop or untangle it, it exploded. Izuku coughed and fanned the smoke away from his now smoke-covered face. He looked at Mei's video. She'd also blown something up somehow. At least he wasn't the only one. Izuku placed the exploded remains of the device to the side. There were plenty of other stuff to tinker with. If Izuku ignored the pain throughout his body, then he'd say he was having fun. Maybe his forced downtime wouldn't be so bad. He rifled through the box of spare support gear and picked up what looked like a smoke grenade. It had to be a smoke grenade because most support gear is made to be non-lethal. Just to check though, he pulled the pin and tossed it to a corner of the warehouse and covered his ears. When no explosions rang out, he opened an eye to see black smoke billowing out. Izuku wobbled his way over and grabbed the now empty grenade. He'd have real fun with this. Smoke or paralyzing grenades were on the list of gear Izuku wanted to have. If he could figure out how to make them himself, then he wouldn't have to associate with villains for gear. He sat back down in front of his laptop. A new video from Mei playing automatically. It was good background noise. He set the empty grenade down and grabbed another from the box. He didn't know how to open without pulling the pin, but he'd figure it out. It was oddly relaxing. Sitting in the dark, empty warehouse with only the laptop giving him light as he tinkered and messed with whatever gadgets he could get his hands on. It'd be difficult to learn a new skill, especially something as complex as inventing, but he was excited for it. He was going to upgrade his vigilante gear and get a rematch with Obsidian. Next time, he'd win. Izuku let that competitive spirit fuel him, the spite to prove people wrong, the determination to show people just how strong he could be. He wouldn't wallow in pity and whine over not having a quirk. He was going to be an amazing hero, and he'd do it quirkless. Katsuki officially decided he hated Kirishima. He was just too similar to Izuku. It was FING scary. Like Izuku disappeared and suddenly someone just like him except with a kinda good quirk appears. There were countless ways Katsuki could compare the two. Kirishima mouthed off about heroes constantly, he always had a blinding smile on his face, always worried about Katsuki, was a total nerd, followed Katsuki around everywhere, didn't get mad when Katsuki yelled or pushed away. It was scary. Katsuki already hated being reminded of Izuku, and now some shark-toothed moron who was his exact copy personality-wise decides they're friends. Now, Katsuki wasn't hiding in the gym locker rooms to avoid the redhead, he was strategically assessing the situation and waiting for the right moment. It didn't matter how long he waited or where he was to try and avoid it. Just like Izuku, Kirishima always found him. Katsuki was leaning against the wall of the gym, still in his Gakuren, when Kirishima rounded the corner and stopped suddenly when he noticed the blonde. "Oh, Bakugo. That's funny, I was just looking for you. What are you doing back here?" Katsuki rolled his eyes and tried to sink deeper into the wall. He couldn't even look Kirishima in the eyes now, too similar. "Nothing." Kirishima just tilted his head and smiled. "All right? You ready to train then?" Katsuki pushed himself off the wall, his hands still in his pockets. "Nope, leaving." Kirishima sputtered and chased after him. "Already? Come on man, what's up?" Katsuki's scowl deepened. "Nothing." Kirishima frowned but didn't stop following Katsuki. The two stepped out of the gym. Katsuki didn't know where he was going, he was trying to get away from Kirishima but clearly that wasn't working. The redhead just followed behind Katsuki wherever he went. Always just a few feet behind, not a care in the world. Acting as if Katsuki was the best DMN person in the world. Just like Izuku. After a while Kirishima started going on about his favorite hero. Listing every fact possible, things no one should even know. Mentioning recent fights and random trivia. Just like Izuku. Katsuki found himself at the park he and Izuku used to play at. He hadn't meant to walk here. Kirishima wouldn't stop asking questions, about him, about heroes, about random things he thought Katsuki would know. Just like Izuku. Katsuki was having a hard time breathing, he didn't know if it was anger or anxiety. "This park is pretty cool. Why'd you come here, Bakugo? Is it special or something?" God, he just needed Kirishima to stop talking. His fingers twitched in his pockets, he could feel smoke start to waft up. He balled up his fists. It's whatever, he'd being dramatic. It's just Kirishima talking. Speaking of, the other boy was aimlessly wandering the park, climbing on some monkey bars that had been set up for the kids around town. He remembered him and Izuku daring each to climb above the bars, neither of them ever did. One of their parents would always stop them before someone got hurt. Kirishima walked over to the monkey bars. "You know, I don't think I've ever actually made it to the other side when I was little." He hoisted himself up the first bar and very clumsily made his way over. He dropped on the other side, arms held out like he'd done something impressive. Katsuki should go home, he was wasting time not only goofing off with a moron, but sulking in his feelings too. Before Katsuki could leave, Kirishima noticed something etched into the bars. "Hey, there's something written here." Katsuki stood a few feet from the other boy and raised a brow. Who cared? It wasn't like it'd be anything important. "I think it might be about you, Bakugo." Katsuki stalled at that. About him? The hell was Kirishima talking about now? Kirishima stood up and walked over to Katsuki, pointing at where the monkey bars were. He saw the skeptical look on Katsuki's face. "I'm serious." There was writing etched into the metal and it looked like it was from years ago. The first one had a name I didn't know, but the second word said catch a dash. Katsuki flinched as he heard the name, his nickname. Time seemed to still for a few seconds. His body reacted instantly. Suddenly, he could feel pain bloom across his knuckles. He blinked a few times, incredulously. Kirishima hit the ground with a thud. He held a hand to his cheek and looked up at Katsuki. His breath hitched. He hadn't meant to. He didn't meant to hit Kirishima, he was just freaked out. Katsuki looked down at the other boy with a mix of confusion, guilt, and of course, anger. He'd been doing well controlling his emotions. He'd been doing so well, and yet, Kirishima was just so much like him that Katsuki couldn't stop himself. He was like Izuku in so many ways, yet none at all, like he was a soulless copy of his childhood friend. Katsuki could feel his breath quicken as Kirishima looked up in concern. Katsuki didn't know how to fix this. What was he supposed to do? Apologize? What would he say? Sorry, you kept reminding me of my missing, probably dead, ex-best friend that I bullied so much he ran away, so I decided to punch you. My bad. He needed to leave, escape, he needed to get out of this situation. Before Kirishima could get a word out, Katsuki turned on his heel and sprinted away from the park the two were at. He wasn't going to deal with it. He'd just never go to the gym again, never go to that park again, never think of Kirishima again. He wouldn't deal with it, he was good at avoiding things. It was Kirishima's fault. Katsuki knew that, but the similarities were sickening. He didn't want Kirishima, he wanted Izuku back. Nothing else would suffice. He remembered what his therapist said, don't let the absence of someone leave a hole in your heart, it's okay to miss them, but if their absence causes you to spiral, then you rely on them too much. That's what she said. He didn't care. He didn't care if it was unhealthy. Izuku was his best friend. Izuku has been with Katsuki since forever. And people expect Katsuki to what? Move on? Really? Give up on finding Izuku, just stop thinking about him? It was disgraceful. The world was going on without Izuku, and now it was going on without Katsuki. It shouldn't. When Izuku disappeared, the world should have stopped and waited. Maybe the world should have done something even before that. Katsuki should have been a better person, his teachers should have discouraged his bullying, the world should have liked quirkless people more. Why the hell did Katsuki tell Izuku to kill himself? Not even he knew the answer. Maybe the world moving on is what Katsuki deserved. He did this to Izuku, he made his best friend disappear. It was only right. Katsuki stumbled to his knees, he didn't know where he was, just that he hadn't stopped running. It was dark out, he was in some random alley. Katsuki leaned against the cold concrete wall, his breaths short and quick. It hurt his throat. He couldn't get his breathing under control, and it was only upsetting him more. He tried to hold his breath, he knew it was a bad idea, but his brain was too panicked to remember the breathing lessons his therapist taught him. Katsuki clutched his shirt. Breathe it. He was Katsuki Bakugo, he shouldn't be struggling, he shouldn't be panicking. He could feel parts of his body start to numb, his lips and fingers having an odd tingling sensation. He needed to calm himself. What did his therapist say to do? Ground himself. He opened his eyes and looked around the alley. He couldn't remember the specifics, but she said to name things he could see or hear. He eyed the alley around him, really looking at it this time instead of just panicked glances. Right, things he could see. His clothes, obviously, the building in front of him, an AC unit above, people walking by at the end of the alley, and his shaking hands. And things he could hear, his breath, footsteps, people talking, the same AC unit's low buzzing. Things he could feel. His clothes again, his skin, and the rough concrete beneath him. There was something else, right? Things he could smell. His nitroglycerin, and the smell of coffee. He was kinda sure that was all. Either way, whether he did it correctly or not, it did slow his breathing. Katsuki shuddered a breath as the numbing started to fade away. He brought his chest to his knees and laid his head in his arms. God, he was a mess, it was pathetic. He shouldn't be freaking out over stupid stuff. He wiped stray tears from his eyes. His therapist said it was good to cry, let it out, or whatever, but Katsuki didn't feel very good right now. To make matters worse, he heard the same voice that started it. Hey, Bakugo? He turned to see Kirishima standing at the entrance of the alleyway. Izuku had moved on from tinkering and taking apart to field testing. It was incredibly stupid for someone who still relied on a crutch to be on a rooftop, but Izuku simply felt more at home up there. He'd made his way up a closed store with various smoke grenades in his duffel bag. He'd made minor adjustments to them, but now it was time to see if they worked. Or he was going to until he heard something. Hey, Bakugo? Izuku flinched and nearly dropped the smoke grenade he was holding. Kaken? Was he around here? Izuku stuffed the grenade in the duffel bag and made his way to the edge of the building, leaning over and looking down. He had his rabbit mask and respirator on, but Izuku wouldn't be surprised if Kaken recognized him anyway if he saw Izuku. He looked over the edge to see an alley. Near a dead end was Kaken, sitting curled up with tear tracks down his face. That was strange, it wasn't something Kaken would do at all. At the entrance of the alley was another boy, with spiky red hair and sharp teeth. Izuku held his breath. What in the world was happening? He stayed still and let the scene play out. Katsuki, upon seeing the other boy, looked in the other direction. Kirishima. Kirishima didn't listen, instead he walked forward and sat beside Katsuki. Izuku noticed one of Kirishima's cheeks was red, as if he'd been hit. Izuku felt anger bubbling beneath his skin. Was Kaken seriously still beating people up? Kirishima looked to the side as well and rubbed the back of his neck. Did I do something wrong? Was it the name? Katsuki tensed. The name? What name? Izuku felt bad for eavesdropping but also felt he needed to find out what happened. Katsuki shuffled and stayed silent for a bit. You can't call me that. His voice sounds raw. Clearly he'd been crying, but why? Izuku couldn't even remember the last time Kaken cried. Not even when he was attacked by a villain. Surely a name didn't make him cry, that'd be ridiculous. Kirishima smiled and nodded. Alright, now I know. I won't ask about the other name then. Katsuki tapped his foot. Did you read it? Kirishima nodded. Izuku, right? Izuku paled hearing his own name. He had a feeling they were talking about him, but it was still odd to hear. Katsuki looked down at the ground. His voice was unusually quiet for someone so normally brash and loud. Yeah. What you read was his name, and the nickname he made for me. He avoided looking at Kirishima, he just couldn't bring himself to. Izuku's face scrunched with worry. This is how Kaken reacted when Kirishima called the nickname? It felt so out of character, but it also made complete sense. Kaken was a walking contradiction like that. Izuku's heart felt heavy. Did Kaken think he was dead? It was possible, but for some reason he thought Kaken would believe he was alive no matter what. Was Kaken actually different? Had he changed for the better like Izuku had always hoped? Kirishima moved his foot side to side and smiled. Do you want to talk about it? It doesn't have to be bad stuff, you can just talk about good stuff. Katsuki didn't answer for a while, but eventually sighed. You're too much like him. It set me off. He grumbled the last part of the sentence. Is that why you hit me? Kirishima didn't sound angry or even upset, just genuinely curious. Mostly. You talk like him, smile like him, love heroes like him, are as optimistic as him, it's freaky. And the nickname? It wasn't right hearing you say it so, he trailed off, his thought having never been finished. Kirishima put a hand to his chin. I dunno what I can do about that. Not like I can change my whole personality overnight. Katsuki groaned beneath his breath. You don't have to. Did I hear you say that? Then don't just put words in my mouth. I'll figure it out. It's my DMN problem. Kirishima smiled sadly. Alright, I'm sure you can handle it then. The two returned to silence. More comfortable than before. Izuku blinked. He wasn't too sure what happened. 1. Kaken made a new friend. Izuku was both excited and saddened by that. He pushed the emotions down. 2. Kaken was improving. Izuku was very happy to see that, it's what he always hoped for after all. 3. Kaken was upset, specifically because Izuku was gone. That made him feel very conflicted. He figured Kaken would be affected by Izuku's choice to run away, just not like this. He didn't want to hurt Kaken by leaving, he didn't want to hurt anyone. But he ran away just to selfishly help himself. Seeing how hurt Kaken was, Izuku was suddenly very worried about his mother. Surely Auntie Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru were helping her? He nervously tapped a finger against his cheek. He looked down at the boys again. Kirishima nudged Katsuki, who scowled. What? Come on. We should go. Katsuki nodded silently and the two stood and left the alleyway. Izuku watched them leave solemnly. A part of him wanted to yell out to Kaken, to talk to him. But that'd blow his cover. Izuku didn't realize how much of an isolated bubble he was in. He really did tune out everything from his old life, his mom, Kaken, his love for heroes. It was all left behind. Izuku had an upsetting thought. Had he abandoned them? By technicalities alone, of course he did. He left without any explanation other than it wasn't his mother's fault. But there was a deep part of him that felt like he'd been abandoned as well. The world abandoned him, or at least turned its back on him, and then in turn he abandoned his mother who'd done nothing wrong. Izuku edged away from the ledge. He should get back home. He slung the duffel bag over his good shoulder and grabbed his crutch that laid on the floor. His legs wobbled beneath him, not only because of his injury but the anxiety coursing through him as well. He made it back to the warehouse eventually, only to find, once again, someone outside his door. He wasn't too upset though, it was Clockwork. He walked towards the man, difficult when he was trying to hold a duffel bag and crutch at the same time. Clockwork saw him and put a hand over his mouth. "Oh dear." Izuku tilted his head. "Oh dear?" Clockwork cleared his throat. "Ah, disregard my previous exclamation. Please go inside and sit down. Frankly, I'm upset you're walking this much, and outside your house no less. Did all the work I put into keeping you alive mean nothing? You wound me." Izuku ignored the man's theatrics, he was too tired to deal with it. He went inside the warehouse. He has too much on his mind. Izuku let the duffel bag fall to the ground. Luckily none of the smoke bomb pins had been pulled, so they were all intact. He pushed himself onto a box to sit. He figured Clockwork was here for a kind of checkup. As soon as Izuku had a moment to breathe, exhaustion flooded him. Pairing physical pain with mental stress was bad. Who knew? Clockwork walked up to the boy. "Hello again, Jackrabbit. I sincerely apologize for intruding upon your residence, but I am a worrier. I simply had to check up on you, and Jiren was sleazy and/or kind enough to provide me with your location." Izuku sighed. Of course. He knew Jiren would give away info even if it was for a good cause. But I see there is a more concerning matter. Say, has anything happened recently? Did Clockwork double as a therapist or something? Izuku shrugged. I guess? Why? It's a part of my quirk. It allows me to see the well-being of a person, not only physically but mentally as well. It is likely the reason people are freaked out by me. Those with mental quirks often are frightening to others. Izuku nodded. Hearing that Clockwork could tell Izuku was fading horribly mentally wasn't surprising, but it was still disconcerting. Izuku crossed his arms. Clockwork might be able to tell something was wrong, but Izuku wasn't going to tell him anything about it. He was just the doctor. Well, it's something you need to worry about. If you could just make sure I didn't get an infection or whatever you were for. Yes. Technically I am here to yell at you. You shouldn't really be walking, let alone gallivanting who knows where. I really do insist you stay home. Despite saying the word, Clockwork's voice remained as monotone as ever. Izuku understood he should stay home, he just didn't want to. But if a doctor said it, even a somewhat sketchy one, he should listen. Right. I was planning on working on inventions and stuff anyway, I'll try and stay home. Clockwork clasped his hands together. That's wonderful to hear. You wish to heal quickly, yes? My quirk lets me know how to best fix an issue, within reason of course. If you have any errands to run outside your home, you can always ask myself or Wendigo to assist. May I see your phone, please? Wanting the man out of his home, he handed his phone over. Clockwork took a few minutes to input 3 contacts, Jiren, Wendigo, and himself. Here we are. Clockwork handed the phone back to Izuku. Make an attempt not to perish. And do be careful with whatever future projects you'll be working on. Clockwork gestured to the duffel bag of smoke bombs. Izuku nodded while internally begging him to leave. Clockwork bowed and walked to the door but stopped and looked back at Izuku. You're certain you'll be all right, Jackrabbit? Izuku was a little off-put by his intensity, but he could tell Clockwork was just concerned. He smiled and nodded. Yeah, I'll be all right. He was near positive Clockwork knew he was lying, but the man didn't call his bluff. Very well then. Please get an adequate amount of rest. And with that, Clockwork had left. Izuku heaved a sigh. He didn't like unprompted visitors one bit. Izuku leaned backwards, his head meeting cardboard as he was still atop the box of support gear. Clockwork was a minor distraction, but the only thing on Izuku's mind was what happened with Kirishima and Kaken. Had things really changed that much since he became a vigilante? Izuku felt guilt pool in his mind. Maybe his mom thought he was dead too. He didn't want to let her believe that. He'd have to write a note or find some way to tell her. He sluggishly pushed himself off the box, making sure to land on his good leg. He stepped into his room and got out his notebook. He didn't have to write a lot, just something for the people he knew, those who were important. It wasn't a lot, just his mom and the Bakugo family. Still, it was important to Izuku that he told them he was at least alive. He sat in his chair and laid his notebook flat on the desk. He tapped his pencil against the page. Hi Mom. I know you weren't expecting something like this, but I think it's important to write this. I want you to know I'm alive and okay. He felt bad for lying and ended up scratching out the last part. But I'm injured right now. Don't worry though. I have someone helping me. He's a doctor, he saved my life. I've been really busy since I left, doing things you probably wouldn't be proud of. I'm really sorry for that. But I'm going to help people, I'm becoming a hero. It'll take a while, but you'll see. I just wanted to write this to ease your worry. I'll be okay, really. It isn't your fault, it isn't anybody's. I'm going to prove everyone else wrong. I'll be the greatest hero. Love you always, Izuku. He tore the page out carefully, trying to keep the tear as even as possible. He folded it and set it to the side. 2 more, one for Kaken and the other for Auntie and Uncle. Hi Kaken. This is gonna sound weird, but I heard you and Kirishima talking about me. It wasn't on purpose, promise. I just happened to be nearby. I didn't know you'd be so upset about me leaving. I thought you'd be fine by yourself like when we were little. I guess I was wrong. I hope you can feel better knowing I'm alive. I'm not going home, not yet and maybe not ever. I want you to look after my mom though. I know she must be really upset. It'd mean a lot to me if you could be there for her. I want you to be friends with Kirishima. I know we've always been by each other's sides, even when you were hurting me, but I think you should be friends with more people. I'm not just a useless Deku anymore, and I'll prove it. I'm going to become a hero, so you make sure you become a hero too. I know you'll be a good hero, Kaken. You were always my personal hero. Still your best friend, Izuku. Same as before, he tore the page and folded it before setting it on top of his mom's letter. Last was Auntie and Uncle's. Hi Auntie, hi Uncle. I know it's been a really long time since I last saw you both. I'm really sorry for that. But I'm working to become a hero right now, so I've been really busy. I know you two must be busy helping Mom. Thank you for that. Please, please, always be there for her because I can't be. I don't know if you guys know what Kaken did. If you do know, then don't think it's your fault. I don't think any one person is to blame. Or, well, I don't blame you. I think Kaken's improved. I think he's becoming a better person and I'm really glad. You should be proud. Your son is going to do great things one day, even if he did awful things before. I know he can move past it. Your favorite and only nephew, Izuku. Izuku tore the last page out and folded it with the rest. He could ask Clockwork to deliver them tomorrow. He was anxious, but excited. He hoped the notes would put them at ease. Izuku considered falling asleep at his desk, but the ache in his side persuaded him otherwise. He pushed himself out of his chair to roll into his bed. He didn't know what time it was, probably past 1 a.m. He took a deep breath and relaxed his body, feeling the stress wash away. Delivering notes and accidentally exploding inventions were tomorrow's tasks. He'd worry about it all.